Contingent when its offsets, voluntary cover markets are segmented, high integrity liquidity is plummeting due to fear of greenwashing and reversal risk. Ongoing crackdowns on certification and disclosure fail because they don't address the legal nature of contracts containing 24 VCM liquidity, low prices, dispersible, top load of 90% worth of scale, requires standardization, legal certainty, emission reduction, subject to revision, exposure, measure, reputation, legal risk certification, cover market segmentation, sale. Only partially address concerns about first added stricter standards of credit disclosure, prevent greenwashing, not address the nature of credit and contracts and production-based financing rather than project finance upward shooting out the sponsor generating coupon only benefits materialized right level sharing marks upon leveraging. Insurance and incentives give you some risk with investors desirable benefits depend on their care, guaranteeing a purchase price for carbon credit that protects investors from market risk but not production risk. Tariffs only magnified segmentation and dampened demand. Quantum and 4. Trump tariffs can dampen VCM demand and further driving the global market more segmented trading. Treating offsets as commodity spots and forwards doesn't address legal and reputational uncertainty about low integrity abuses nor high integrity reversibility, particularly key to boost liquidity out. LD and 24 growth and offsets depend on integrity risk, resistance risk, and low income community scholarship approach for the global north and south segment of with lower integrity, greater uncertainty, especially the forces to reduce divestment depend not only on investment but preservation for decades while first undermine complete the verification audit do not eliminate the analysis of liberal segmentation short-term analysis of commodities require high liquidity benchmark contracts need to dominate market share key assumptions uniformity purpose toward high quality market segmentation complicated standardization push out to screening climate disclosure regulation applied by reliability experience illustrates market liquidity fell. CFT just published and will update guidance to standardized contracts managing disclosure and crack down on fraud, but that won't provide markets the confidence to differentiate high and low integrity that's key to liquidity. Dumas in 24 VC notorious greenwashing portal abuse overshadowing potential of illusion sustainability fundamental legal land government now hesitant about carrying fraud or trailing local suspension to change their rotation or taking a small military against by CFTC taking first steps guidance setting central derivatives forces suggest CFTC is committed to attacking fraud for accountability essential only that can transfer legitimate UC FTC or RC contracts tied to GG mentioned TCM specialist only contracts acceptable manipulation. CFTC encourages to consider whether adjustments and reversals such as buffer quality depend on the CFTC will update its guidance once cover steps copy benchmarks standing stakeholders to assess whether the market is available to or illusion. CFTC to require new mechanisms such as assurance reduce reversal will allow evaluation of take fraud and create trust in what is now a broken system. Trump does not thump and Solvency 24 willingness is incentive for cover markets including marketing disclosure requirements demonstrates increased oversight expectation for one line certain management without impact of cover market regulation to provide voluntary rather than policy on the federal dollar trapdoor state Washington California Hawaii continue momentum in the United States compliance markets. His transactionalist approach to foreign policy can dampen global conflict drivers but requires leverage he currently lacks with the global south slaughter in 25 the growing agency middle powers of the century the U.S. are trying to accelerate this transactional perspective cast difference versus the powerful management of bargaining power middle powers company most powerful this is willing to walk away trying to be a peacemaker right and worth preventing what's went through deals so far as many countries being eager to come to the table will spend the power to walk away when the deals up to their liking. Scaling up DCM financing unlocks U.S. negotiators' ability to leverage it. Wagner in 22 invested as much longer than development. The money will come from private regardless of what governments do. Unlike when negotiators co-create a solution, the U.S. government will propose to use carbon credits to fill the gap clearly on the day hedging. Needed 8 to provide financial flows and relation with global south helping scale up. That dampens approximate triggers of great power escalation. It's not about revisionism nor polarity. Existential conflicts more likely to emerge from interactions with middle powers in the global south, whose perceptions of a hegemonic competition generate resistance to cooperation. Twice in 23, World War III reporting beyond Russian and Chinese agitation, more multipolar, more great, more for the global south, fighting the classic can contribute to balancing and diplomacy will likely will exacerbate instability previously. Transition to the CD strap behind escalation of spillover conflicts and increased probability war through middle powers conflict which we agree with incomplete conflict growing up aggression is calculable. Great powers in a major impromptu wars, the interest died in the caucus meetings, South and East Asia not both not anti below third block and disaggregated. Most active will motivated by nationalism to oppose the challenge of managing risk in the world resistant to being recruited context will defeat promise here retrenchment the U.S. badly needs well-funded sustainable development could significantly increase its stake in developing nations global to climate change. Regional and proxy conflicts risk nuclear escalation even if not directly they create a self-reinforcing cycle that erodes every constraint risking deterrence failure. Samson in 24 fueled by collapse of cooperative mechanisms challenges festering accelerate hot wars in Ukraine, Russia, the humanities, SES and others spread and intensify conflicts elevate risk of regional conflict escalation the spectrum of full-scale global conflict looms large with the threat of nuclear annihilation may deter indiscriminate use of nukes and practice and preventing catastrophic scenarios on certain world proxy wars are not escalated directly involved largely nuclear power persistent conflicts and the general erosion of co-op hot wars the Black Sea, Suez and SES key jump points for food and goods to disrupt global supply chains and the cultural escalations of fomenting populist nationalism independently transactional cooperation with middle power is key to overcome collective action problems vectoring many existential risk part. And 22, so spaghetti globalization brings complexity, system-wide risks, backlash, great power politics, about these challenges, raise collective action, public existential risks like global health, finance, migration, inequality, demand, greater co-op, to sustain coexistence under trying to need middle powers to loss, volatility, and sustain international co-op. Contention 2 is finance. Global financial crisis is uniquely likely to stem from offset derivatives, as trenching crypto and moral hazard makes risk impossible to price in. Calling in 23, sovereign cover most likely to cover offsets while improving standards of governance, civil order, manipulation, fall on the ground, securitization, environmental minorities, adverse elections, and set by subjects of flush, subprime carbon, significantly stability, risk, not materialize, so hard to limited size of function, ETS, proliferate, increase scale and scope of risk on cause was trade securities unable to assess that and sometimes lead to global economic downturn, constant channel transmission, uncertainty of the wider economy, blockchain, crypto, and entities will exacerbate problems renewing, demands for low quality, zombie projects controlled by speculation, created bubble conflicts, ordinary brokers own equity stakes in fund auditors, Interpol warns trigger a financial crisis on par with 08. The current buffer pool approach only magnifies these risks, especially in uncleared over-the-counter transactions, and unlike other scenarios, there's no bailout trigger on 23. Futures impossible to assess counterparty risk and clearing counter trying to contribute collateral risk, waterfall suspension covers about simultaneous default ensures even in counter-shock loss trades. Settle more hazard permitted buffer pool introduced because all credits, not dollars, all become worth as more hazardous clear the pool not sufficient to cover perceived 11 problem high quality withdrawal can make credit that case of FedSep registries have no guarantor perceived to risk verification obviously actual risk finance centuries of less than incorporated into BCM to improve risk management and increase confidence. Financial crisis overwhelms efforts to manage inevitable policy crisis. Feedbacks compound nonlinear increase in existential risk lords. In 24, humanity means comparing several crises intersecting the impacts worse than existential risk contrast to individual to away intersecting with stress supply crisis and unprecedented farmer and connected positive feedbacks. The systemic risks are endemic can be managed by reforming the board but not eliminated, not just accelerated, also synchronizing customer risk and critical and quick succession feedbacks overall safeguards income. Turmoil financial crisis increase populous weakened rule of law, equity, capital decrease international welfare, go benefits, globalization, resource income. Turmoil promote migration, reaction trigger, state collapse, low understanding war feedbacks are showing not inevitable would escalate all problems in a catastrophic spiral. Nuclear escalation is likely in every hotspot and all existential risks become unmanageable. Will sharp in 24. Downturn risk industry conflict triggers other risks escalate hotspots in Korea, Israel, Taiwan, power stepping in and eroding our Russian stabilizing finance contributing to conflict constant overwhelm capacity response power riches escalate conflict involved needs accelerate inadvertent escalation post conflict include Balkans, Kashmir, and Korea, top landing prevailing amid stronger growth in the US. New shocks will be unmanageable. Decades of Brazilian shift away risk ecosystem collapse research shortages Adversarial reflecting existential risk. Empirics prove other studies don't account for Trump's protectionism and propensity for lash out junk in 24. Diverging conflict interacts with other variable primary explanation based on empirical Trump gets more because the economy moves better shots. Joe economic slowdown increase military conflict leaders seek diverging targets to mobilize and raise marginalized opposition which are trying to become revenge because their economies are downhill asymmetric. Interdependence contributes increases aggression. All states will engage in more protection policies. In this context should be especially concerned with the slower growth cost of diversionary use of force. By the way, no recession. Earning at 4.3. Economists and market experts say expect inflation but not a recession. Believe there's no room for growth even with headwinds. Still think the economy will expand while thus settles. Markets may be a little slower, maybe a little higher, even a shake given the short-term themes. Expected to drive growth. Guts in AI and automation or gains in AI and automation remaining time. Investors just had to wait while companies sort through tariff-related strategies. Thus, the plan: the United States federal government should begin a deposit refund instrument for carbon reversal of offset energy emissions in the United States. Contention 3 is solvency. Treating offsets as performance bonds and derivative contracts is key to identify and eliminate low integrity and unlock financing for high integrity. All 24 mortgages will no characteristics of offsets and commodity or bond offsets can be securitized while condition coupon payments in the emission outcome not to the buyers exposed to contractual risk and social value offsets and form bond as well as insurance pricing can address permanent additionality leakage to differentiate for low for high quality and improve liquidity bonding and insurance reduce financial risk with offset and validation insurance like replacement costs can be required paying out in leakage securities reduce risk buyers face of failures to maximize impact and diversification lower cost financing derivatives encourage investment in high integrity CFTC proposed factors in listing achieving potential requires standards encourage liquidity and enhance integrity standards should address parameters of standard derivatives contracts and regulatory oversight that functionally applies Dodd-Frank to exchanges and over-the-counter derivatives as margin for clearing counterparty risk check. And 11 Dodd-Frank can never regulate with discretion relevant to cover markets derivatives as swaps must comply with reporting margin requirements apply to unclear derivatives are clearing and clearinghouse regulated by the CFTC to offset greater risk of financials and demanding economists focus on OTC derivatives outside oversight allowing for excessive risk taking policymakers to start with Dodd-Frank rather than create conflicting requirements for carbon market. U.S. regulation is necessary and sufficient to acquaint and 23 standardized contract able to accommodate different treatment across jurisdictions establishing legal nature should be prior to regulation and harmony across jurisdictions most insurers and registries are U.S. meaning close to the legal nature of the U.S. internet secondary trading facilitate liquidity for confidence drive quality and effectively unpaid responsibility and fraud is the only politically feasible way to expand global financing but leverages U.S. market power to bargain effectively. Victor 11 engaging developing counterparts massive trades in politically feasible ways also to keep costs hidden for budget credit providers instead of making it harder to engage credibly because of these countries to avoid trade policies the use of market power by adopting rules to identify and reward with high price and high quality rather than race at the bottom will have an order leverage over what happens to the rules it sets in the market make it easier to negotiate with oligopolies. CFTC guidance empirically denies and dumps links as future updates get more specific and strict north and 24 markets have reservation lack of regulation and fraud market conducting diligence in contracts guidance and whistleblower alert place formal obligation to perform diligence and derivatives. DCMs already performing 1% of regulation by enforcement scene aggressive enforcement of regulated commissioner statement shows oftentimes broadly next likely to go beyond guidance and directly impact by licensure enforcement authority. Coming wave of anti-fraud enforcement does to Davis at 11:15. CFTC alleging fraud against Newcomb CQC and Steele's SEC and DOJ brought parallel action penalty of $1 million. Increased scrutiny demonstrates proactive stance in shaping regulatory framework standardization and create reliable markets participation review to ensure compliance developments will be crucial. No neg fiat, there's no negative resolution, allows infinite unpredictable counterparts.
Okay, are you good?
Yep.
Okay, the plan, what does it mean by begin?
It does what?
So it fully implements an offset market.
It does not implement an offset market.
Or it implements a deposit refund for the offsets to trade, but like, yes?
That is what the plan is.
Okay. Deposit refund, what does that work? How does that work?
So a deposit refund is basically, it's analogous to like a tax and subsidy. So a deposit refund, you would deposit your money in the offset. If the offset was deemed to not increase emissions, you would get the refund, which is the subsidy. So if your offset does
So
not,
when you buy an offset, you pay a tax. That's the
let's
deposit.
back up. Wait, no, okay. So a person pays the money and it goes into the thing. What is the thing? Like, where do you pay your money to?
Probably clearinghouses is how it works in the status quo for
What is a
contracts.
clearinghouse?
So when you trade financial commodities, so like stocks, bonds, futures, swaps, etc., even spots, the way that it works is that there are like almost like verifiers who are the people in charge of making sure that I am giving you a proper contract and you are giving me proper money to pay for that contract.
Okay. Okay, sure.
it has to be proper.
Second advantage, the first card says that crisis is likely just because of things like crypto transing. How does the plan resolve like all the issues with crypto that exist now?
Issues with crypto? We haven't read an advantage about crypto. We've said that.
You said that economic bubbles exist. How does the plan resolve like broader economic bubbles with like blockchain?
We haven't said we
crypto?
solve.
No, we've said that there are bubbles, but the one that matters and the one that is going to pop and cause a polycrisis is the carbon bubble that is underpinned by fraudulent and mispriced offsets.
Well, no. So I get that, but that doesn't answer the original question, which is that you've read evidence that there are other bubbles that exist that would also cause like a crisis.
Yeah. So like the Kung evidence, like I really don't think we have.
Okay, sure. The Cavachar and Wishart cards is downturn. Why did past downturns not trigger an attack?
Yeah, our evidence is actually really great on this question. It says that previous downturns were able to, be lessened and did not cause nuclear escalation because there were forms of bailouts. There was no guarantor in the offset market, so if a bank run happened, the Fed would bail them out. There is no Fed to bail out the offset market, which means it would inevitably collapse.
And there's no money for them to do it, which is why the deposit.
The only answer to Thumper is bailout. Is there anything else?
Yeah.
Just bailout. Okay.
There are more answers.
What is the incentive for Russia and China to escalate in like the Balkans, as your evidence says?
Joanna?
Clearly, Russia's like willing to start wars and like take land that isn't.
Sure. What about Kashmir in Korea, randomly highlighted? Like, why does Korea go nuclear?
Well, no, North Korea just changed their like nuclear doctrine to say that they're willing to preemptively use nukes. So I think that happened like.
Okay.
And
we've also read a thesis card about diversionary
You said
conflict.
that there's like carbon bubbles global. Why do other countries decline and not resolve that?
Why do other countries decline, not resolve?
Do other countries decline in the world of a carbon bubble?
We don't think they need to.
No, like I'm asking an internal link question. Like, do you think other economies decline? Let's start it there.
That is a really irrelevant question because we think our impacts happen regardless of whether or not other countries decline. I suspect the one and will have some thoughts, but we haven't made a link claim about that.
No, too bad.
It's 7 offsets and then finance. Okay, everyone's got it? Everyone's good? First off is the OLC category in the United States Executive should request a legal opinion over beginning a deposit refund instrument for carbon tax removal of offset energy emission in the United States. The Office of Legal Counsel should publicly advise the executive to begin a deposit refund instrument for carbon reversal of offset energy emission in the United States. That competes and solves accountable lawyering, revitalizes credibility and transparency. 120. Oh, say 30 provides presentation to propose action to uprise the someone and principles to advise on energy prescribed things often compared to the best of the law to vision of the term of carbon the OLC has been extremely the very defensible different. For some line restoring taxes, the goals and independent professional advice requiring government norms of its principal OLC to commit to his effort of uplifting opinion, publication, and transparency to regardability of the OLC, the scrutiny, utilization of public when analyzed in order to justify major role to have Congress and public understand the legal basis for executive action, hold the OLC accountable. Nuclear war code 16 more than negotiation, hold the nature of development, natural, now we're to perfect the system, board of trustees, university, expect to give advice and public supporting action, gov lawyers, interpretation by law, this interpreter action officer, negotiator, architect, who interpreted arbiter of disputes from policy made lawful, a prompt is public disclosure to be the norm, not the exception, the rule, to be public and public vision, memorial, professional strategy, should this was have, congratulations, no seeks for the better of policy, board of view, public spring negotiation, broadcast, exclusion, legal opinion, facilitated best policy options, we can next the eyes, resolution, because it proves an opportunity, cause the applicants, key to Netflix, coach it. Next off is the court's counterclaim, the United States Federal Judiciary should mimic a deposit refund instrument for decarbonization by offsetting energy efficient vehicle use, exclude and offset these remedies, hold the constitutional guarantees and the environmental standard of development deposit refund instrument and carbon reversal offset energy emissions in the United States. CAC, we can solve judicial crime activism, pills of British all accidental gas. So, 24. Future technically permanent permanent litigation threats such as medical domestic legal and to protect environment future branches of prospective souls that in the future government the future that including news media standard interpretation of guarantees to represent a period of domestic decision making to or any regrets and retribution rigidity previously reward with the public relation there is not arbitrary and the closely tied to laws and domestic cultures do not will interpretation to court inject long term perspective in the short term decision making under actual force offer back to change by open policy option later review option under HR LSC corporate about the specific from TPD standard based on public actively with legal economic policy and judicial by the court whether places State reason for the courts and the strong common law to the court is law laws to the U.S. and the hardest offer people learning future litigation courts. They're not writing standard best to cover the policy choices each depends on whether plaintiffs find doctrine to between the culture of obligation features and laws to bring elevate rates and current system transform obligations spread and solidify holding states liable for a longer time towards the level of food emancipated by its current and shorter positions making those held liable for nuisance get offset to question projects and comply with rulings and also courts have help allow voters and use officers to continue to comply with the general music for constellation just by dispensing the red launch regulatory industry regulatory programs that provide ready sources of credit that the complex profitability opens opposition from law companies legally play interest rate in the establishment liability that ensures market success in Poland and goes up in a couple of remedies when permanent legal professional litigation for between two remedies leaving the lights option in context of non subject to third party obstacle definitively make permission this issues the environment proposal to original opinion for remission trading marketing that enhance substance of subsequent work and judicial financial trading using an opportunity for leads to the capture within tradition as a result. Next off is our savings capital in the United States federal government should receive beginning a deposit and refund instruments for corporate reversal of an offset energy emission in the United States that can be consulted statements mimic statutory change effectively. Balgonas 22. Receiving not formal law they result in government things that clarify the lack of force of the law present this was to you may think present well done safety federal reserve drafting with a potential to application of the legislative receivers and social similarities in huge court not to receive as statutory directives the primary source formal use systematized the spectrum protocol delivered to it. Receiving systematized modern law for SEC receiving to block and implement the making law was that some rational systematic law and accessible and whatever double civilities about areas of conflict with the production of sort of like utility grocery receiving support law there and no types of reason cannot avoid policies particularly with the profession of the judicial law for investment to influence of course expanding towards prevent abortion back contamination extinction just 17 days while product system that NASA has the platform which of by threatening putting to legislative reps engaging torture interference implementing this sort of information to allow NASA to go forward will be giving sense being new world and how bond conflicts will be mutation and mass extinction. Next off is the main counterclaim the United States federal government should ban market-based instruments for decarbonization. The counterclaim bans RFS. Only 19. The MA use and RFS mandate by regulatory customer carbon intensity goals trading plays a central role. Banning the RFS reverse causally solves bank like 17. Contributors include excessive religion and religion for protection notorious cannot occur without fertilizer for natural legion or death of reducing for natural restore materiality unless the dead zone the Gulf desert reverse extinction. And these 70 deaths have largest on record fertilizer creating blue GC opportunity and oxidation stress mortality is also durable. The funeral creating chain reaction increase mortality not just being but oceans. Next off is the command control counterclaim the United States federal government should adopt a command control scheme for carbon reversal that solves better what is seen control heat. Regulation can be more effective in such as name falls and means that politics seems to stand with the dictates specifically before and take the different emission levels and employ after face penalties mandating installation of maybe more straightforward to cover with econ incentives. It's locked in on crypto streaming now cutting back on other offerings to focus new initiative trade off and destroying the admin. Mariotti 2034 results of taking school with harmony crypto regulated with rules unlikely to afford with increased opportunity to mention in accordance with those market delivering or up to action with the period limited resources crypto enforcement without which lead to action on CFTC's traditional areas. Markets are highly complex to police durable fiat requires the CFTC to investigate the whole market. Goes when you flexibility to market another way to increase costs for the government with the variability and compliance strategies means with the increase of monitoring and reporting inspectors and completing the job at cause and key to radically increase regulation burgeoning and crypto schemes cost South Asian instantly Dickinson and permanent 12 to U.S. citizens are from South Asia and saving U.S. are topic over permanent worth the president of the Dutch democracy for the plus Southeast Asia to spend money open to the market generally inject money for all business opportunity generates $43.8 billion annually go to land after the list of funds finance by words and military unit. Then third next topic hospitality MBI is tax or cap trade. They're not results in MBA's apprenticeship for the business person emission either the tax or cap trade and this certificate is not qualified. They violate Tom 22. It's a deposit return is after deposit return is not a tax deposit refunded. These are refunded to the consumer limits vote neg 1 limits additional asks. Explore the topic to unpredictable sectoral subsistence financial mechanisms 2 ground court assume economic and political costs. cost not minor administrative tweaks. Next off is the advantage counterfeit. The United States federal government should adopt a new free speech policy for the people of the Republic of China, the Russian Federation, increase foreign direct investment, revoke all tariffs imposed by the 2025 force future tariffs, adopt standards for carbon offset credits, be and carbon offsets. The first link solves the prevents great power. Second, solves middle powers, restores leverage wagner, since it's a question of monetary flows to the global south. Third link solves war there, young evidence, since it's likely because of protectionism, banning bundling deflates bubbles, that's Kong, banning offsets market solves financial risk, that's also Kong. Go to the offsets advantage. Small state leadership fails to bind states to multilateral initiatives, which is based on the powers of the integrated by giving themselves authority to power the countries and implications well, giving governments when opposed to small group to million financial demanding negotiates increase the appearance of the balance by small group companies include info about how those affect countries so design for little time to countries other than the group of the process results in the show that will just make the countries so going to complete more release torture getting large right besides it will make some multilateral orders also not engaging can be high smaller groups limitation come to the war when they defend the world so they can take the control to and interest considered no war Russia and China will react military communication from military all Russia and China but United States need a stable congenial international environment neither are orders of based by military seriously to the that of countries want to steer influence it seriously seem worth facing the war they views were substantially disarmed go to the finance advantage growth is unsustainable causes extinction and possibility of decoupling with an available timescale necessitates G growth fluctuate 24 the crisis under where your we see law of right animal extinction diversity laws assessment for conservation of leading economies and not just one affecting with heating the false apartments and monitoring education verification of majority of urban market with little change to resource extraction and property embedded in the global phase population growth increase and million people optimal population life between 2.5 and 5 with every person habitats or additional urbanism and activities to safeguard environment everything economics and future attention on how we manage resource needs to only refer to the emission for capacity only shed to your media because mentioned or underreported or says no trip into overflow when state changes only feedback under control of state favorable certification and the loss media is designated Thomas metals and game disrupting endocrine flashing making sure degrade chemicals and people force of mineral carbon and then they absorb with microplastics we cause is loss of a lot the diseases and expanding key are being around with pathogen security, weakened immune system, poorly communities like research to consumption and equality will increase feedback loops and political public resources across all regions, increasing consumption office can be because of rising needs of transport building and other decoupling content to meet the Paris carbon cutting policies or inadequate contractions forces outdoor now scaling which unlocks a paradigm shift towards sustainability. Monster 24. A declining state of a decade holding return anticipated recovery economic reduction and environmental effects as environmental compromise with policies lead to some education on the comprehensive points institutions and responding to the land to go down scaling prevented equality catalysts and educated medical center food for example in this case of the equipment information company by social social between destination cases away from paradigm shift to equality crisis catalyzing growth the West Africa where the economy is unable to do so response to crisis no impact economic decline but growth towards it but more towards the shedding leak over toward expansion that will provide more towards the fighting sparks the function of either abilities to fight off the link to growth the optimistic relative spoken growth increase the likelihood that this is involved in military war growth which will require following market best version those that attract attention to population on our CP increase political problem for leaders accomplish short of war reaction to the deprivation result in leaders nationalized growth result in pursuit of resources and welfare generating focus seeking resource authoritarian party growth increases the leadership between negative without generating nationalism optimism and direct effective growth effective related to leading effect states more risk acceptability despite successfully trade and identity increasing calculation low growth operation opposite direction duty isolationism growth misleads AI extinction great the basic growth which American company working in would be true for automating all tax no risk rewards no waiting about from the GDP return sheet market share producing monopolies which interest in results with straight all active and positive feedback when it comes to cascade or necessary development under GPT was run first after GPT meeting prediction dropped to 2047 market 2047
okay, you good?
Yep.
Status?
The status quo is always a logical option against new plans.
Can you kick planks on the advantage counterplan?
June.
Come back to me. No.
Okay. I want to talk about the advantage counterplan. So the counterplan adopts standards for carbon offsets credits and then bans carbon offsets. What will you defend as solvency for the counterplan?
Well, we could probably kick blanks. Kick it.
Okay. Changing our answer, we'll kick blanks.
So which plank are you kicking?
Well, no, like in the process of the debate.
Like in the
we could kick
scenario that
blanks.
you win, that we should ban
Okay.
carbon offsets. Like the first one could
It's like
still.
you just write your counterplan. But the command and control counterplan. What regulations would the counterplan implement?
It says that it could be, it could just like mandate that different companies use abatement tech. It says it could be a performance standard. It says it could be a product standard, and any form of non-compliance to that command and control would face any.
And why does that solve middle powers?
Well, your argument is that bad offsets now have an internal link to, diplomacy. Argument is that it would get rid of those bad offsets.
Okay, you read everything, right?
We read all the off case.
Okay, I know what you said. The judiciary or like mimic deposit refund instrument. What does mimicking a deposit refund instrument look
Our
like?
evidence indicates that courts can enforce policies by leveraging fines against non-compliant entities, and so although they wouldn't adopt
but
a
Wait, in what
deposit
ways is
refund
that fine
instrument
different
per
than a
se,
deposit refund?
it would work similarly to a deposit refund instrument. such as
Okay,
that
in the
if
world of counterclaim, can they get their
If the
refund back?
offset project failed, they could be held liable for
Wait,
that,
hold on,
although
hold
it
on.
doesn't create a bond.
But in the world of the counterclaim, can people who did a positive offset get their money
Wait,
back?
the distinction between the counterplan and just the plan is the credit with the court system isn't money, it's legal liability. It's not a tax. You explicitly said that the plan would be enforced like a tax and subsidy. There's a crediting system with the court. Angle says that allows people, defendants in court to be held liable, and they can use court credits to offset a project to no longer be held liable. Like the card is about offsets. It's like quite good.
Okay. Restate beginning a deposit refund. What does that look like?
The English evidence says that everything exists in law. Courts can simply restate it instead of creating new law, and says that lacks force of law, but they're treated as quasi statutes. So from
But we
now
don't
on-
have a deposit refund now.
well, no, but the CFTC has regulations, as you said. So it would restate
No,
existing.
they have
things
they have guidance documents that say voluntary. You
So it
should do
would
this.
restate those guidance documents as a precedent that would then be applied in future.
Okay, but those guidance documents don't include a deposit refund.
No, we agree, but that says it's quote judge-made law. It creates a synthesis of past precedents to create a new precedent, and says it would mimic statutes.
No, I need you to do one.
Okay, I see.
OLC. Courts. Restatement. We'll call that, I guess. OLC, courts, the restatement, the like tort law one.
Gotcha.
The one that was just a plan but with the word restatement in it. Yeah, beautiful. Ban MBIs. Advantage counterplan. And then the command and control counterplan that overstretches. We good? Admiral, sweet. Interactions with middle powers cause distinction. Now they refuse cooperation because the U.S. is not seeking collaboration, which means they amplify conflicts and road deterrence, the switches and stamps in their woods. Evidence does not assume that the rule that they have in a post-hegemonic or in a post-hegemonic world with great powers are no longer the ones that lead, which means that their evidence just says that they do not think they have the power, which is our uniqueness because the plan gives them positive cooperation with middle powers independently overcomes existential risks like pandemics, finance, migration, and inequality is the pork evidence when conceded. Their second argument that China and Russia will react is our argument. In the post-hegemonic world, these great powers are not the ones that determine conflict, but rather it is the small powers who affect regional diplomacy, which means our impact must come first. Finance. There is zero link. Our impact was not growth, but rather the systemic risk that escalated public crisis. In other words, it was not a recession before the crunch, but rather the crunch itself, which means that their sequencing claims about decoding are incoherent. Try or die is backwards. Assessing the relative efficacy of transition pathways is the only thing that matters, starting with the sustainability debate, and then taking a leap of faith for anything else is an error that is the wrong order of operations. Only solving the case has any chance of solving their impacts, no matter how small the risk is. That's relentless. Including the investment of countries in the U.S. per capita income where China's rate scenarios are out of scope. Examples of decarbonization under degrowth. Efforts to reduce fossil fuels under GDP is normal under capitalism. Growth is monthly, decodable, and has common transitions. Two pathways are possible to go through solar transition, may advance into universal vote, and common disaster. The second undermap for the growth and unless second more likely to move fighting forward, web contradiction, growth, environmental action, pivotal degrowth, through climate, or medical analysis, relation to decoupling is possible, applies to be reached only by massive economic contractibility, feasible, practice, totally one reverse pessimism is unfounded. Economic crisis is counterproductive. Finance-led is the only solvent to degrowth that's tickle. In 21, degrowth is an opposite of recession. Scaling ideologies to cover reduction while expanding socially important recessions do not discriminate. Degrowth is achieved rapid transition, renewable energy, reverse ecological breakdown recessions. Abandon such protection to focus on getting growth, whatever the ecological cost may be. Even if we lose the impact to economic collapse, the political effects alone still cause a pro-growth backlash that just accelerates existential polycrisis. That's Lawrence and Bertram in 22 life and crisis under survival of Earth and nuclear warfare, social eventually escalation of nuclear, which are likely consequences of Ukraine and China pandemics, leading to civilization collapse, fascism, and inequality measure. There's all making other worse supposed and address the community need to degrowth the 10% campaign will lead to trauma, the loss of mileage with rising defending rights, including increased international conflict, nuclear warming, possible like effectively in pandemics. Their inevitability and sustainability warrants do not apply. Systemic risks like limits to growth and financialization and complexity are our impact. Their just agrees. Our evidence says that those conditions are quote now endemic. They can be managed but not reversed. But the escalation of them is not inevitable. That's the Lord's evidence. But we're hitting a green tipping point. That's 1322. Regulations about the Western Green Energy Government projects were roll out prediction prices of all progress taken by YC 20 to market during one cheaper. Never then cheaper fossil fuels, the most cost effective, climate and friendly version of green transition for clean money for clean energy scale, getting out the polluting sectors, personal social incentives aligned without the need for complete ideological conversion. Automation is good for growth, and their predictions are apocalyptic nonsense. Customers have people going to be just fine. We've been here before. Feel the robots steal, drops something classes zero to Elizabeth, nice statistic for economists where the machine will like their service industry jobs, mark that at jobs. There's also capitalism is better for tech. The alternative or the degrowth causes it. That's better in 22 target regulations better for capitalism. You can simply go nothing argument. Less than for capitalism is extended most strategy. One party say can do with it. It creates a culture where people are afraid to think when you filter every party say trying to vote a voice where you get to think it down to people over their feet. Then there is some for groupthink. This is stability, creativity stagnates in the long term. Mark that at long term. But there's no bad AI impact or uniqueness. There's no reason that growth is causing bad AI, and there are multiple checks on it, including registration, insurance, and accountability, which means that only the app can solve it under a regulated market economy. Betting in 22 markets processes 1948 overestimates the anything not more regulable as rational to be newest reasoning or I see flops, and opportunity to extreme target regulations better fix the revolution as the war regulating air outlaw. Nothing is negative less various in favor of regulation. Most interest actions what AI won't partake can do with people over their feet. Then the economy stagnates the social truth, zero policy competition, social engineering, subdivided tax and specialized distributed control based more centralized control mark that at centralized less control because I already read most of that. The Esperis argument is also affirmative because extinction is a nationalist, but ours no Boomer and Psycho term. The Borges is wrong. Their evidence is from the hypothesis section, but the conclusion is that it only explains initiation of war by war autocracies, not the U.S. That's Boomer and Psycho. In turn, these exist to be because never such relation is likely to demonstrate the ability to perfect for regional attributes, to both men to war for some states compared to others, but to many more states previously. Selecting developed states that have lower grades for growth potential for war and then growing autocracies. In contrast, downturn within great powers uniquely carries nuclear risk because they're already involved in low-level conflicts. That's the studies in Research and Jung. T. We mean deposit refund is a form of carbon tax that includes performance bonds. If not, this is a counter-term of MBI, Fisher, L95 MBIs, focus on tax administrative purpose, carbon taxes, deposit refund, recovery, removal, combines taxes, subsidy for disposal, regardless of settles of commodity by the prices, deposit refund, and certain conditions of performance bond applying CO2 emission reductions, mechanisms for inclusion of risk force, and market-based and if tax necessary, and temporary tax charges apply to emissions or fuels, negative tax deposit refund. For one, they will limit two asks, neither which we have the state's counterpoint cannot sustain a year debate. Second, F-grant outweighs performance bond, the constitutional, emphasis, uniform safety outranks everything else. Three, Fisher was a comprehensive review, which means it is more predictable. We meet Mozilla has no intent to exclude because it says such as, but it also explicitly includes taxes, which is the after. Tom Card does not have intent to define it as a recycling company trying to assuage consumers about the refund. If you read it, it does not have any intent to say it's not an only a tax, but it also does a refund. OLC counterplan, perm to both, perm to the counterplan, perm to the plan, and the counterplan's process, perm is in there, perm to the counterplan and the plan as follow on. It does not solve one. The plan specifically is key. That's LCFP and 24 LPC integrity working on for reasons developing countries like Dolphin development process policy funding the loan seed. There is a security over credit financing depends on effectiveness of securities of the OTC following the entire chain depend on really about from the certainty of the price against partially markets that derivatives about the same legal certainty necessary to regulate by including regime of financial instruments. Second, legal certainty is key. That's Clark 24 on the former remains ambiguity like a instrument from a significant risk on regulatory finance. Watch slowly wise legal section important institutional certainty is substitution for course of former reduced in fire value shall request from buyers legal treatment bolster confidence in investment policy for investment reforms today. Focus on disclosure certification of regulation clear guidelines are important. Three, giving another process veto triggers interminable jurisdiction fights in the CFTC. It crushes the market, which cuts Solvency processing 7 the regulation beating innovation on the legal certainty and margining by forgetting significant hurdles which are by the more properly for terms like indeterminate delay in bringing markets to agencies documents jurisdiction subjects a clearing to the jurisdiction to both. Every time this process of lead innovation gives up be to the most recognized by the CFTC underlying assumptions of the future which jurisdiction not be to be one by the most efficient means margin unable margin CFTC often brought to the release wages continue to be in the most appropriate portion margin. 4, it struck down for violating the CFTC's exclusive jurisdiction. Johnson. And then 8, the CFTC's jurisdiction including anything up to the forms of future costs to be for all the federal regulators. The internal benefits as lawyers can interpret and shape bylaw. Trump will not follow it because he hates it, which means it also doesn't spill over. And the only line about war is a specific UN scenario, not an actually predictive impact. The court's counterplan, perm to both, perm to the counterplan. It doesn't solve because it is infinitely delayed. Our impact is soon, but not the other CFTC means they never go beyond the guidance. I read all of the deficits on the other counterplan, which will be true for like everything on this flow. The internal benefit does not make any sense because it's not assumed the court that exists now. It is a 6-day conservative court which is not going to prioritize future generations or the environment, which is all there. And the stuff that there are evidence indicates, but there's also no spillover because every decision is insulated from every other. And there's no terminal scenario in the cards so we get new defense when they do it. The restatement counterplan, cross-apply the perms, do both. Do the counterplan, do the plan and the counterplan's process. There are 2 perm texts in there. Perm to the counterplan and the plan. Cross-apply every deficit from above. It cannot solve. The counterplan restates law, but there's no relevant law that could serve for the basis of the plan. Also, the one is the evidence. So it's just the court's interpreting, so it links to all of our arguments about CFTC jurisdiction being key. There's no benefit. 1, no back contamination. We have gone to Mars before with no impact. We would just leave our rover up there if it's such a big deal, but other countries don't because they go up there inevitably. As to private actors, but there are card does not say terminal scenario, it would just be a disease, which quarantines and other things like the WHO can solve it. Ban MBIs, perm to both, perm to the counterplan, it links to no benefit, commanding control flanks fiat. This thing is also no part of the app. They ban the entire DCM, which gives the possibility of good offsets because we're the only regulator, and does not prevent financial crisis because the derivative contracts was should other than foreign exchanges. Banning the RFS doesn't solve. Adams 24 will be reduced demand for ethanol for fuel, and present property for other and ethanol development by continues board in international bank of ethanol production. Work that ethanol production. There's also no debt impact because there's no status quo. The advantage counterplan. Perm to both, perm to the counterplan, perm to the plan, and any combination of claims. It doesn't solve other countries using first declaratory changes fail. This prevention body trying to watch it. They fail because nobody will believe us because Trump is incredible. Economies bad because regions are going to punish about one of these wars. Smart communities, uncredible pledges are worse for stability because adversaries will think it's a trick which it doesn't solve. The FD guideline for evidence investment alone is insufficient because also spring development benefits. Revoking tariffs is also insufficient. Protectionist policies don't just include tariffs in the reality says they make the problem worse, but not that they responsibly solve banning and regulating offsets. They need to make up their mind about what the counterplan does, and we get new answers when they actually pick the claims because they're contradictory, which means it is not our fault that they couldn't write a text that did not do opposite things. The regulation counterplan, perm to both. It shields because the command and control solves. The CFTC doesn't have to do anything. Perm to the counterplan is not mutually exclusive, which because we can combine it links to that benefit because the CFTC would be the one regulating. It does not solve their cards as regulation is ineffective in quote reducing emissions but not for solving offsets, which means it's not an advocate. There's no crypto to say extend the 1 numbers and proves the CFTC is already acting spending purchases. There's no link. 1, the plan just adds an item to an existing list of requirements. Second, there's no cost. The deposit refund is implemented and overseen by clearinghouses, which was cross X 3 is there's no enforcement cost because of the numbers I read out. Fees are normal means of sufficient IFA and 24 do responsible required versus managed to do fees. Crypto regs are dead. Crypto 320 FDIC banks now engaging crypto activities. Others approval less. And the CFTC to withdraw advisory effective immediately change to when the CFTC follows a new environment for under strong cargo firms are shifting with the using regular climate settlement guidance solves as White 325 after the CFTC first weeks has made offers to settle enforcement latest time to strong cargo to the least we expect to solve these in order to shift the resources and free up more resources.
Are you good? Yep. Okay. First question is the certainty key warrants are like in order for the development of larger investments in secondary trading markets and offsets, there needs to be legal certainty. But you've said there's already massive investment now, which is happening in low integrity offsets, and that's happening despite the lack of certainty. So why is it the case that certainty is necessary?
No, hold on. The reason, so there's two. There's the argument you said is only applicable to Advantage 1. We think legal certainty is kind of like self-evidently important for like financial stability. But in the context of Advantage 1,
Wait, why is that self-evident?
that legal certainty matters for financial investments?
Because
there's
you've
no reason
said
for
that
people to
this
make
evidence is
investments.
just like, in order for people to invest in the offset market, there needs to be legal certainty. However, in the 1AC, you've said there's investments now, it's just that they're invested in bad offsets, despite the lack of legal certainty. So how do you square that circle?
That the investments now are uncertain investments, which we think are bad because they
But
trigger
that's
both
about the
advantages.
certainty of the integrity of the credits, not the certainty of the plan. Why is the plan certainty key?
I don't understand, like, I feel like we're just going in circles. Like, I don't understand how this question is different than the last
I think I
minute
do.
and a half of
The
this.
DDEV page, the Lawrence evidence is an advocate for managing the poly crisis. What warrants do you think say that the Trump administration or subsequent administrations will actually target slower growth, manage environmental unsustainabilities?
Well, okay, to the degree that that applies to the 1AC, it clearly applies to the status quo of degrowth, because what evidence do you have that Trump is going to, like,
My
beautifully
question
degrow
is,
the
you've
economy
said,
into
like-
a soft landing that, like, solves public
No,
concerns?
but that's like my question is, you've said we need to manage the poly crisis. You've read normative
Well, you
evidence
said
that
that the
said
thing
it
that
would be good.
triggers a supply crisis is a carbon bubble, and it is sufficient to solve
I
a supply
guess
crisis
I'm
to
just
merely
confused
avoid the
because
bubble.
you've characterized like our impacts and your impacts were the same all along. But my question is, how will the poly crisis or any kind of unsustainability warrants actually be solved right
It's
now?
about avoiding the bubble popping, which we think we solve. You also did not contest that
Okay,
solvency.
I guess
Whereas
just like more
to achieve
materially,
successful
like the
degrowth,
impacts
you need
we
Trump to
read,
want
like acidification, pollution, biodiversity loss. Literally, how will we manage these now?
Again, it is the issue is that in a poly crisis, there's no attention to managing those things.
So who's paying attention to managing them?
Who's paying attention to managing them when you blow the economy up?
Okay,
Like,
so
this
you're
links
just
all to
responding
you.
by like saying we don't solve it either. But my question
Well,
is,
that's
how
pretty
do
relevant
you
when we're
solve
like
it?
comparing how do we solve like
Yeah, so
these
compare.
impacts.
How do you solve these things?
Avoiding the bubble. Like we're just going in circles. Like, do you want to ask something
Russian,
else?
you've said Russian and Chinese non-reaction doesn't matter for conflict. What is the scenario for escalation?
It's your card just says that those countries don't intend to start conflict and that they're not aggressive. Our evidence
What
indicates
conflicts
that
do they respond to?
they respond to.
Yeah.
Like there is a conflict in Ukraine. We think China is interested in Taiwan and is doing salami slicing and
Your
grazing
scenarios
tactics
are
in the CS.
Ukraine, Taiwan.
We
What
think
middle
that they're-
powers are key to those?
Well, the middle powers in the region. So in Ukraine, it's like other
Well,
Eastern
U-
European states. Like
Ukraine already lacks
Belarus.
leverage. They don't have a offset industry. Like, what middle
These
power
are just
solves those
assertions.
conflicts? What middle power solves Taiwan?
We are buying offsets in Europe. Like that is where a bunch of trees are planted and a bunch
Wait,
of DLCs happening. because Europe has
Taiwan,
a
there's
giant
obviously no
renewable industry.
offsets there. It's a tiny
What do you mean,
island.
obviously? But the region does. Indonesia is full of planting
what did they
trees,
do about
as
the
is like
Taiwan war?
the Philippines, Vietnam. We're planting trees in all those places for offsets. You have just asserted this.
Joanna, which AI, like, you read a card that was just like, what did you say? Growth or degrowth stops AI, causes AI? Like, I didn't, which one was it? Did you read Bennett? Did you read Bennett or Jane or both?
I read Bennett,
Okay.
but I also read.
And
Yeah,
then-
I read Bennett, but there was actually like two Bennetts
Did
that
you
I
read
read.
both Bennett's?
Yeah, but they're like somewhat the same, but not all the warrants are highlighted.
Okay, yeah. Page 24. It should be sent. Let me close out of things so my laptop doesn't crash, and then I'll put order. Okay. It'll be the OLC counterplan, the courts counterplan, the restatements counterplan, ban MDIs, the advantage counterplan, command and control, the finance advantage.
Was control a counterplan or an advantage?
Command and control
Oh, that
was
one.
the like counterplan with the DA.
Yeah,
So, like,
Great. Which advantage?
the one with DDEF.
I got you. One sec.
Give me a sec. I'm gonna turn so the sun is not looking like this. Okay. Good. Now, MSU. Okay. The campus owns the entirety of the case. It requests an OC memo over the plan's offset is announced publicly to ensure maximum transparency, which the executive must and will comply with. Use sufficiency, compare the comment with the status quo, and then the net benefit must outweigh. Do both fails. One accountability comment, and then 20 strategic to less viable. You know, policy maker, customer transparency, and that's something denying accountability after what you should generate likely to outcome. As a result, overall for and the strategy and action paragraph alert. Second is post hoc rationalization. McClellan no subjects of basic Chris Batman, and yet they will avail post hoc rationalization controlling right. Now, single one opinion cannot be both binding and office, and the former OC opinion becomes advice completely cut off. And the OC was originally authoritative, also captured hardly tells all action, private lawyer, legal action, whatever action is no longer. When controversial opinions, executives will do not, and the expertise, and that is bad for law. The use often Stevens, there's no net benefit, so there's only a risk that there's only a risk in the voting neg. Now, 2AC2 is due to conflict, that severs, which is a voting issue for neg ground and clash. The only mandate is an advisory request. Any solvency is purely based on mandates and downstream implementation of a memo. And evaluate competition through mandates. Permitting effects kills ground because any counterplan could cause a plan. It's no different than the U.S. model with an international counterplan or the federal following what states. OC opinions do not require force of law. Rather, answer executive questions. Solvency the OC now. Final work considering policy noted force of law, no social effects. The opinion is subject to by obligation, consequence, opinion, social legal advice. And there's just questions. Topical requirements for close that one. As adopt requires legislation matters of adopting. Not a practical environment court cases, legislators, adopting, synopsis, cleaning, public conclusion. When they pose a liability and regulation for environment, it means formal acceptance and enforcement lawyer. For adopting an act policy except for limited effect for now. Only exists policy implementation. Second is clean energy policy must be binding. Douglas in 25 action. And looking at must enact legal and regular legislation. The text will need to be such a requirement. Policy alone requires force of law. 12 distinction orders policy surrounding not something defined as really requirement. No discussion. The right goes to the law rights, state policy for this advantage. This be the policy force of law. And the fourth legally enforceable requirements. Prefer force of law is key to all ground unenforced cases. Spike Gordius. Like econ oil EP trade off independently explodes limits permitting this counterplan. Makes any advisory action topical like guidance, agency memos, or dicta independently precision. Don't treat adopt and policy as spillovers that mean nothing. Each has strict legal meaning, exclusive executive action. Now, from other issues is intrinsic. The counterplan only requests and provides an OC menu over the AF. The counterplan is way too broad and could be over anything, including things external to climate policy. The counterplan must be functionally competitive. One is ground, plan specific, eliminates all generics, and a possible burden that encourages small cases and destroys fairness, especially against new undisclosed plans. Second, this logic, textual combination distorts opportunity costs. With semantics and plan software, they scramble or delete phrases, create unpredictable advantage counterplans, or borrow words like not to functionally separate the plan. That's imperially aggressive and makes every treaty a moving target. Third, education. The devils are in the details. Everyone agrees that climate policy is good. The question is how we enact it. No abuse. The guarantee ground because all counterplans are distinct from the plan. They speak for less than infinite prep. Independently doesn't solve. One is vagueness, which quite literally does apply to this one because it just does a memo. Patrick, and then 23 potential causes are made to state the coherent present literally action concerning the existing causes. Disorder amendment was the boil of nation of infinity. Procedural elements. Second is rightness, serious, and subject, or future, signal, actual, controversy. Common justice, belief, case, judicial proceedings. The next one. permutation. This is the plan after the end. It delays and winning due to the counterplan gets rid of this because the counterplan is a pick out of the action the plan takes. It adds temporal separation between the counterplan and the plan. Even if each can be delayed, it's a new sequencing fiated by neither. Rejected intrinsicness restores all ground. They can specify normal means to spike time sensitive or agent specific Ds and prevent education around real world trade-offs. Independently, the 2AC did not include a formal text. I think if it did, it still severs. We don't need to win this. And if they go for this counterplan, you should stick us with it. But if you do not go for this permutation, you should access seller. And then worship mandatory not be met in the later time duties or not aspirational. What now? Prefer delay justify science fiction. The source timely education and spikes around worst case examples don't apply to the delay counterplan. It can be excluded on theoretical grounds. Now, this might sound silly, but group deficits 1, 3, 4, and Trump says no. Against this counterplan, it makes no sense because the counterplan functionally makes the plan legal because executive lawyers say that the plan is legal, which means that any sort of conflict legalese that they have read as their deficits would not apply to this one. It simply applies to the Trump deficit because Trump hired the lawyers that they say no defies reality worse than 11 people restricted OC more support the rest of the should dividing over illustrations never or say part of the answers of the justified party more rational credible any to trigger question aging weight independent OC underscore question really opinion critically writing and never order keep contaminated respect legal conclusions. First next argument is transparency. That is, the company is more certain. Argument 18. The executive powers apply cultural laws such as transparency, exceeded essential healthy, eventually executive better. Measure such regular transparency, hallmark, justification should be avoided consider process of powers to manufacture industry community use cannot explain others or to not explain its own justification. Memos are predictable readings along worsen. And clients and interests consider predictably realize and organize. No OC tax provider rest and apply the failure. OC transparency outweighs. 2AC was quite literally incomprehensible in this part. It just says nuclear war once. That is wrong. Opacity ensures lawyers are excluded from national security questions ensuring nuclear crisis. Transparency ensures better. Military policy making limiting nuclear use. The covenant as a precedent because transparency has never been used inside of the OLC. That stops nuclear escalation. For the president, maybe because that's an OLC. Then calling opinions what about the president except on the OC. Give rise cause aggressive present power over the launching or major conventional attack with the over 30 also organized action. Must be defensive reasonable action believed to major conflict. It's by the constitutional designation. Now go to the restatements counterclaim concede due lack of overseeing for courts and ban MBIs and advantage counterclaim. I will do theory on the advantage counterclaim now. For Connie, I'll give you time because I realize I just screwed Connie. Okay. Conditionality is good. We did what we did against new undisclosed claims which are independently skewed pre-record and eroding issue. One is blocks you abstract into the 2AC, which requires multiple options. They increase same angle, which clash towards you second. As next flex thing is always reaction to abstracts and infinite test the intrinsicness of unpredictable advantages and add-ons and deficits. Third is arbitrariness, no different separating models, no reservations for theory. And an unpredictable rule is worse than none, which always shifts and ruins neck predictability. 4 is logic finding. Those policy option disproving advocacy does not make the plan good. 5 innovation versus conversion. Many fallbacks for safety and testing and experimentation. Skew in research or nebulous thumb ideas and procedures. Dispose adult condoms size makes abstracts too powerful. And centralizes process and place causes the research imbalance. Now the DTF page. Yes, link. The plan stops the biggest carbon bubble and then the largest economic bubble, which was 1AC cross 6. They don't get anything, no take back, which causes cowardice. It means that we don't get at least anything. Past downturns were cushioned, but governments were unable and unwilling because of compounding debt. The distinction between poly crisis and not our collapse is all just MSU word salad highlighting. But they said that they solved the next global recession, so this is just incorrect. I've inserted re-highlighting of the Wisher evidence that demonstrates that the next one will be worse, but trier is not backwards. Our index category for Parker. 171. This piece to an aggregate 100% more legal order difference between the human country does only fraction whole society difference between the difference fraction versus history cost would destroy the future. Now framing issue for the transition only we need to win this. It is better than the worst excesses of sustainability. Collapse causes reduction. The societal complexity and resource use crisis cascades across borders, which reduces energy supply and reorders society, which is commodity evidence. This might sound silly to their next two deficits, but it's not our transition. We conceded that their bust would be bigger than anything else. And the collapse sooner is better. Home run 3D collapse. Unless you community having sooner impacts worth looking at. The stability were rapidly collapse, energy stabilizing, lower fully increase. In case of watch rate, recognize water would not be possible. 46-degree collapse. Again, reversing climate change. Only a transition solves the case. Administrative gaps water down the plan through hidden emissions. The political subterfuge neg on presumption, which is Fletcher. The transition would end extractive practices. 1 grand 14 finance process. So now also collapse making different finance for extraction, sustainability gas extraction, like Southern GG. Global crash making different on house water starting on India. Reduce emission argument about reverse the crash. Now the next argument is sustainability. It is wrong. 1, ecocide. The profit motive drives resource extraction beyond biophysical limits that combine effects of warming, biodiversity loss, and resource crisis are existential. 2nd, war. Profit maximization ensures nuclear belligerency. Derivative war. 62 to order US Russia, China was phenomenal countries. The policy first talking about nuclear blood and eliminate arms control. Now conflict with capitalism. New civil power hegemony establishing equal dominance, extinction, conventional nuclear. Push for first colonial capital. Initial profit. Initial annihilation. 3rd, pandemics, extinction, growth causes a derivative structural event. Permanent public company like commodities, exploitation, trade forward, disease, hard to track. Wildlife causes species version of monoculture, remaining new aggregate sense of do not exist. Human close working, global change become vector environment, transition to extinction. Now Their card is wrong. 1, does not assume Jevon's paradox. Jersey is too optimistic. Efficiency gains are met with more adoption and crossing out efficiency. Second is population growth outruns all measures that contain global scarcity, which is the lesser evidence. Jersey contradicts the thesis of the case, which says that there's no regulations and corporate belligerency. And that's high now. Thermodynamics, Sorman in 23 decoupling. That's model that case statistics scholar organized infrastructure studies and as attainable to eco-trempic decay material by physical efficiency. On resource limits and word form more oil gas to associated carbon linkage and externality evidence of industry consumption reduces. Emission 93 countries to at least 19. The decoupling cancel trade is also taken into sufficient 135 orders. Decoupling cannot be mark the card and be achieved. Now, AI must outweigh 1, extinction. Profit orientation causes catastrophic misalignment, locking in existential resource monopolization or war, which is the garbage evidence. We did not say S risk, but there are multiple other scenarios for extinction in terms of cascading 25. AI can actually emerge not from decisive event, interconnected feedback, and combining ability to increase the risk and causing extinction, escalating the AI, which is critical points to cascade advanced AI manipulation, intentional, and cognitive social liability, AI launching, the OD against and CIC grids each attack with escalation, and physical battery, the first economy, enter instability, autonomy, economic warfare, destabilizing trade, stability, nutrients volatility, crashes, no full cyber black trigger, dominant causing economic crashes, market card, economic crashes. Yes, link. Their evidence does not say that regulations are coming now. They conceded arms racing, the profit motive, and incentivizes capability maximization to cement market share, which is growth. Second is regulatory capture, E1 and 24 air company, and anti based security commitment. She said, much of the revenue purchase with fall interest metric or miscellaneous charges or breaking. Regulation for company different company possesses security, and eliminate expensive visibility and ability to so walking after into more infringement. They can lower scrutiny. Lastly, they said transition causes it wrong. This card is about central planning, not ours transition, which would quite literally end technology. Lastly, no economic war. 1, turmoil. Divisions become low-level. Leaders want to avoid defeat, turn inwards to resolve political problems, and increase the propensity for isolation. Second is warmongering, growth funds, military war chest, and it's constantly leading to high levels of belligerency, colonization, markets, resource, and wealth. Internally, growth stokes nationalism. Both are Boehmer. Indite is wrong. He applies to the broader theory. And recession moderate or allowing relationship business and work failure to divide for security and expenditure risk, and pressure to central recovery, so it's unrealistic. Mark Liao at unrealistic. Liao.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah.
You said it was not your transition. What did your transition look like? You said it would end all technology?
Really big and bad. So there's a few sort of substantiations. First is your thumper arguments, which is that the next transition, sorry, justice, but like the next transition would be way bigger than other recessions, and there's not another buffer for that. So like
okay, I understand how the transition begins,
the second
right? A big collapse.
No,
how does it proceed?
So the next one is Holgren, and the card after that both say that in the next big economic crash, we would not have the resources to be able to develop growth again. Growth at its current state has used all energy, all fossil fuels, etc.
I understand what we're not doing. We're not redeveloping growth. What are we doing?
Like we become cavemen. Like we've read a card that says 1% of humanity surviving is good in the context of growth being so unsustainable that growth is more homicidal than taking the leap of faith.
Sorry, and this card is where?
So Farquhar makes the impact calc claim I just made, and then like that should be in the context of everything else I said, which is that we should take a leap of faith given growth is so homicidal now.
Okay, but so that leap of faith just looks like no more technology of any kind, no more innovation, no more.
Yeah, like economies would become way more.
Economies back to like 300.
I wouldn't say 300. Like I give it like a solid like 1850, maybe a little before Industrial Revolution. But like our argument is that economies become way more localized. We would like barter and trade with like resources from the forest instead of planes and ships that emit a whole bunch. Like
I'm so excited to trade with you from the forest, Gene.
Dude, I'll trade you everything in my
Okay.
wallet for the 3 ballots. That's sort of how it would work.
That would be nothing.
I
That's probably
understand
true.
the OLC counterplan. What card have you read that the OLC has the jurisdiction to do so? I understand
So the
counterplan
reason this doesn't make
requests
sense is
this-
it's not like competing agencies. The OLC are the president's lawyers. So they have jurisdiction over every agency actually. Like
Which is the card that you read where?
it just like every card about the OLC. Like the OLC is the president's lawyers. Every time the president wants to question whether an agency action is legal, it goes either
Right,
to
but the F isn't even like the president or the executive, like commander in chief, right? We've said the CFTC is necessary, and like you're just making all this up. Like, can I have a line in a card that says
no,
that,
okay, this will be very clear. Every time an agency action or a new guidance memo or like action past a guidance memo exists, the president will go either to the White House lawyers or the OLC and request
and your
is
card
it
that
legal?
the CFTC listens to this is where?
Well, we've read a card that says agencies always comply. The first say no card is insane. It's like it says that taking it like as like there's like precedent, and basically nobody ever says no because it's internally binding to every agencies, and the only people that can say no are the AG or the president. But the opportunity cost for the AG or the president to say no is way too high. But it is internally binding to agencies. Like it says that.
It's internally binding to agencies?
Yes.
Where?
I'm like Morrison says binding, and the only people that can get rid of it are the president and AG. I'm pretty sure I remember cutting this, and it's like basically bar for bar that.
Okay, I want to talk about the AI scenario. Why, like, how does it get existential?
The 1 in C card just says like, the normal killer robots paperclip thing. The 2 in C card says that AI could commit cyber attacks, bioterror using like medical innovation and like.
The one in our the order's topicality and then offsets advantage, which was the first one. Huh? The offsets advantage?
I thought I heard another one.
Is everyone good?
No.
Yeah, I assume so.
I'm good.
Okay, I'm good then.
Alright.
Topical apps must adopt a market-based instrument through a carbon tax or cap trade. They don't mean one, not a tax. The plan doesn't put a price on a carbon emission through a tax and deposit. Refund by name and function is refund, which is not a tax. Rebate is a simple test. The app is non-market-based. That's a Moselle. This the only adjudicated court is saying, well, 122 deposit on a country's tax proceeding, the collection of never research, treasury deposit waiver, and 94 degree deposit non-characteristic act to not just revenue and above provision of consideration amount is non-payable as long as it is possibility for consumer to take into deposit does not have a settling price. Taxes or payments that go to a treasury without compensation. The app violates both. And 22. Taxes that were without compensation. Taxes or payments not paid to the treasury. They can be enforced without receiving a transfer to fee. Deposit refund is a fee for city. 22 years is a quality work fee. It's a limited fee. Then refund at the time of deposit. Taxes exclude fees. Means 20 tax means revenue for not to be a specific privilege. The distinction is clear. The opposite fee in exchange for an offset tax rates is a revenue independently violates voluntary. 15. Depths of the tax if you have to enforce raise revenues if you can see that the service not all. Do a confer upon all the fees not revenue without offsetting costs or offering a benefit to fees voluntary individual would avoid choosing not to take his revenue. Reveal to seeing a contrast. Their counter interpretation is bad. A market-based instrument is either carbon tax or cap trade. Instruments like deposit refund instruments are common for one of limits. Their interpretation expands taxes to include both deposit systems for cars applications or industrial applications and taxes on individual air pollution, fertilizers, water, or construction materials. Those are distinct from taxes on emission and enter any negative subsidy issue or into the topic. Difficulty taxes are deposit along energy taxes that factor your polluted but says what wastewater construction emission taxes on the traffic and introduce mandatory deposit systems are used for packaging credit or liquid appliances and those could be arranged in any category. That excludes the topic. Topical cases could fiat rebate for the geothermal tax on any non-renewable generation, increase permitting for clean power plants and implement a clean energy standard. Instate any climate liability rules, transmission subset, which all unfolds so the government should take environmentally friendly action that's multiplied by exponentially every industry-specific design and technology subsets. There's infinite charges, fees, RPS, and ES. Course 19. Non-recognized policies such as subsidies, RPS, and ES. Their counter-interpretation is arbitrary and unprincipled. It lists 4 random types of MPIs, but the reason most of those are market-based is just because they increase the cost of polluters without doing a command and control regulation. They can't explain why logically their explanation could result in other subsidies being included, which makes their interpretation unpredictable and an exclusive appeal to one article not widely cited in the literature. Limits out by MPIs. The only constraint since the topic CEP decarbonization are meaningless, explaining the topic over touches research, creating premise images that prove the F. Push the next on educational extreme 2 is ground non-tax and trade fundamentally change the trainer to be asked. They become headless or functionally fail to set the advocating act minor administrative and control rules increase subsidy funding by a couple thousands, or acts 1 of a dozen current subsidies without making debt in the budget. This allows teams to make the most defensible circumstances for green policy from economic and political standpoint. Abstract defenses of clean energy policies are useless because teams will strategically avoid large cases linked uniqueness on market instruments of the status quo. Question 19 non-market-based instrument and entry policy dominate the U.S. and over regulatory policy of the national government, including BES, RPS, lower corporate and energy tax credits. Only stringent tax or trading schemes provide a significant shift to domestic climate policy patch generic renewables bad and fossil fuels go to ground now is symmetry to be a rich game destroying fairness and ruining the next ability test. The when they say over limiting their terms of cases one carbon tax may allow industry specific variant line, which is independently sufficient to include a plethora of apps. They get making data centers, shipping, farmer construction, military, crypto, aviation, biofuels, ag, logging, taxes. They get to specify mechanisms like BT, fit, or revenue like payment, UBI, granularity is possible and good. Among 60 corporate taxes that include over practice which is paid what should be taxed on ancillary to when it tax use revenue hard imports and then the tax from countries to the country. Benefits upstream downstream choices, assessment of corporate taxes, specific tax design, 2 cap and trade ban act. A wide variety of cap and trade schemes here are broken. Cap and trade apps makes it be described right design as with breath and death. Policy 7. Category number of these restrictions, the most important proposals, different reports where they cap and applied upstream and downstream to be counted to mitigate the costs passed forward. Sport depends on unless it's important about waking substantial cost elements or options. Depends on revenue for current funding for receive value and PK of our divine periods and allocate for each coverage rights for the accident of constituent only CO2 plus activity multi-gas recards exchange rate system verify sexual revenue recycling construction tax and capital and labor to guard against pricing may be other link codes with non-US systems even if there's no impact advantages. Check 2 alone accesses every industry in deep debates about renewable technology traded assets and international climate effort innovation through advantages is better. It encourages death in case next instead of creating races to one and done ask and ground always is reactive. They choose their case and speak less past topics like healthcare prove that limits create adaptation and clash. They say Afghan is not key. One, they have deficits. Both apps have deficits based on preemption alone. Fear is a lack of researchability not topped by certainty. Modeling based deficits are low-hanging fruit and built into every case. Each design and industry has unique untouched key words like federal lands, key, border adjustments, U.S. code, key, or jurisdiction. TBMs are not extra key since it's a price on imported emissions. Two net benefits. Even if states is unbeatable and unlimited topic with no link, uniqueness makes it a toothless threat. After November, there's a zero topic T as net benefit. 4, 3, if they're unbeatable, then you can beat them. On theory, they see predictability. The Bender card isn't a product of Fisher, it's a product of Stabbins, which is a completely different taxonomy. They didn't read it, but I'm preempting because I think that they probably will. We lynch and predictability. It's defined as a tax reform bill. To get regularly converted to data for pollution, work in the contracts with the inputs of money for emission, the tax can make a fee or tax alternatively form as the EA agrees. The EA is MBA's inter externalities, either by incorporating costly taxes or creating property rights in the market. So does OECD. Only how something MBA's executive market externalities by incorporating cost of production, consumption through tax facility establishment of proxy market. This never refer to internalization of cost, which makes sure that it makes of pollution and reduction of market, and may refer to the deregulation and selectively do directly modify prices even if compliance is costly. They say they made Moselle. It says that there's only two mechanisms, both internal terms agreed. One either only means two. Solvent 20 either means a choice or exclusive between the two alternatives. Two via is exclusive ally. Identity via email means electronic transmission but does not include transmission via text, Twitter, or common on social logic agrees. De facto inclusion and omission is meant to exclude. Morpheus substitute depth which declares the term means excludes any meaning not seen. This is well known canon. All omissions should be understood as exclusion. Go to advantage offsets. No great power grudge from Russia trying to both be stable and congenial relations with the U.S. and the goal for trade and long-term goals. Nothing will be worth risking World War even if the U.S. was weak. That's Mueller. This advantage defies common sense. The only hotspots they've cited are Ukraine and Taiwan. The offsets are not key to either of those. They've asserted that Indonesia, but they won't care about Taiwan. And offsets are not key to European leverage because Trump will trade offsets for sending aid. Military motivations are minimal. Mueller neither of them cause goals and inflate the economic sense of historical campaign 30% against Russian U.S. as a misguided that Asian period doesn't dominate. It doesn't matter if economic impairment includes to be obsolete. There's no impact. Rights rates and increase impact of climate. It's such as separation of the media or all of this creation via high talk to statistically insignificant levels, market levels. Middle power leverage fails. They can't buy larger states or balance interest. Multilateralism can't overcome collective action problems or enforce agreements. That's what reject launder this impacts its Christmas tree, highlighting that it starts to be above the word without warranted internally instrumental impacts. Middle power diplomacy fails. Proper to middle power like a limit like minus the rates of China's Australian life limit compares in contrast to Europe. Weak relation or tension between states like Japan and Sugo implicate interaction diplomacy is ad hoc and lacks coordination. Market lacks coordination.
We actually purposely
advantage counterplan T. OLC.
I sent
I'm
some
assuming there
cards
is.
for OLC.
Stephen, did you also send one?
I'm about to.
Okay. Nice.
Okay. I just sent it. Panel, good? Oh. Yeah, no,
Oh wait, actually I want to confirm, what is it again, chapter?
it's right before T.
Okay, yeah.
Michigan, you're good?
Yeah.
Beautiful. Not going for middle powers, but I'll concede Russia and China will never go to war. It does not answer advantage two because the wish-out scenarios about global cooperation over slew existential risk, and the jump scenarios about Trump starting a war. Their cards say Russia and China don't aggress, but they would have to respond to Trump first use, but it never answers the impact on OLC, but it answers the impact on OLC, which cannot be vaguer because there's no impact in English for the scenarios. The finance advantage, existential polycrisis guarantees extinction, and X is the fastest in turmoil to all the negative scenarios, overlapping structural issues with economics, political polarization, and environmental crisis, and disease, overwhelm response capacity, which guarantees systemic collapse. That's Lawrence, no recession defense, assumes polycrisis, which is stink, and does not assume initial overlapping crisis. Our impact is about the crunch before polycrisis becomes unmanageable, and they don't have defense that is assumptive of other existential risks. They do not have terminal defense. Polycrisis, the largest terminal link to international cooperation over things like AI, biotech, and effective reactors means the overview is irrelevant because of what you see Richard is a terminal link to all those impacts, and says sustained growth is key to debt bailouts, which is our solvency argument. Since there's currently no guarantor for offsite market collapse, means the app is an internal link turbulent transition because it generates a buffer pool that bails out the offsite market and softens the blow of the polycrisis. Now, the bar evidence, we meet their impact calculus. No one tries to nuclear war panel and on truck 50 potential for delivery next nuclear conflicts not been removed. Most estimates put risk more than the next 100 million 10% destruction and death among major states across the world due to exposure fallout. Nuclear winter plus temperatures below freezing also to show the ozone layer risk are severe and models confirmed analysis even a small nuclear conflict trigger the nuclear winter disintegration food supply mass separation state collapse etc. risk possible where recovery becomes impossible. Humanity comes out of the riches pandemics. Now sustainability debate is irrelevant. One, back to the question of solvency. Our impact is the crunch from unsustainable growth. Only reforms in neoliberal governance have any chance of solving inevitable contradictions between growth and the environment, which is Lawrence and Cornelius. Two, decoupling is feasible. Reducing externalities is a normal condition under capitalism. Zero degrowth scholars think decoupling is impossible, only difficult. It's comparatively more likely than all countries embracing degrowth prefer. Cornelius says consensus. Cornelius for the decoupling is best of two recent literature reviews 179 articles, 135 empirical studies, emissions reduction work. Policy degrowth scholars are pessimistic. Neither claim no decoupling is possible. Now, it's tried to avoid nightmarish forest trading with Michigan BP. Even if they're right, it would solve. That is not a life anyone wants to live. It magnifies the link to the backlash DA that the 2NC blew off. One, resistance from corporations and institutions will block and backlash, absent transition, investor alignment, escalating polycrisis, and triggering every one of their collapse inevitable scenarios, which is Lawrence and Bertram. Every time you read their card from 2013, you should think about what the CEO of Exxon would say to forest trading with Geo Park. Obviously, they would incredibly backlash and make it so likely that those policies internally turns it. Now, but the Hickel evidence link turns it. Recessions, internal link to transition, kill socially important sectors, and focus on restarting growth, but no care for environmental costs, which makes it plain a sequencing question. That's Hickel. 3, energy transition investments, key to the scale necessary to support solvent degrowth, otherwise amounts to desocialization and mass die-off. 24 without activities, degrowth in the form of control collapse, result of crisis, growth, but happen rather than being a choice, little chance of settling into a state in which majority of workers organized societies and knowledge accumulation over a large-scale renewable energy-based system, and necessity of achieving growth and more sustainable. They say presumption. The plains regulation solves if they're right. The plains regulation solves if they're right because it will create a buffer pool. That incident. Now the profit motive caused extinction. Their transition does not eliminate the profit motive because it necessarily just results in transition wars, which was above. Now, yes, decoupling market missions. Facilitate absolute decoupling. The alternative resident letters. 22. Cutting emissions both on degrowth or decoupling. Degrowth proposals are inserted as green tech. Breakthroughs disprove. Alarmist record from methods to early. Tech will be needed to reduce emission power. Societies will revert to less efficient tech offsetting savings incentives, which spurred solar and wind. Cut it at solar and wind. The rest of the AI impacts relevant, and we answer all the recession defense above. Other countries solve it or cause it now, which means that solves the link. Advantage counterplane. New planes are good, cause of critical thinking skills. They don't have an external reason or offense. Yeah, TMBI. We mean in counterinterp NDI's included deposit refund mechanisms. It's functionally the same as a carbon tax floor and subsidy ceiling, which their interp justifies as per the cases in the 1R. We meet the counterinterp. They say the court's case was determining EU member states, which obviously not predictable for a topic about the US. It's a tax embedded into the price of the bond that is proportional to marginal emission to sell an annual bond. It's a deposit refund as an deposit refund regarding the bond as a tax. The initial price of the bond can coupled with potential subsidy. The refund tax will be proportional to pollution according to polluter pays, but bond means tax even if they win deposit refund doesn't stop it. And one with NDI, accidental performance bond under tax can also be considered a deposit refund. Either way, they're included after Mason. And a performance bond classified as tax is also the deposit refund. We meet their interrupt tax. The no revenue is generated to the government does not disqualify. Still a tax set to zero with extra steps. Boom. And 85 deposit refund introduced question attention but effects of negative price. Not government may not be involved. The tax is set to zero and the subsidy is a requirement made by non-government transaction will acquire. Respond by increasing price of transactions. Introducing a deposit as part of the new price amounts to mandatory deposit with the sole requirement is a refund that may be banned. In terms of the liability to pay the tax to insurance amounts to performance bond. CFTC margin requirements are mechanically indistinct from Fed capital requirements. They have never lost a T, but even if not, it's still a deposit refund bond. And 85 funds of deposit refund one market generated either measure specifying the obligation of the firm would be taken or the government would have to be financially involved to government and initiated after in outweighs their intercancy app making the topic 2 apps, which seems to overprep the NDT. Carbon tax preemption deficits are made up, and no one has recap and trade because it lacks coherent answers to generic case prices. Their own definition of now they say deposit refund is a fee. Being a fee does not mean you're not a tax, and their definition of tax not including a fee proves that their interp does not allow subsets because it cannot be quote improved for a specific purpose. The counterinterp doesn't link all of those apps were not clean energy policies or for decarbonization, which means there's no terminal offense. If the industry specific offense is possible under their interpretation, it can't solve limits, which proves that the counterinterp solves the rest of their offense. Now the OLC counterplan, prove to the counterplan and then the plan. We don't need a text because it's a test of competition, not an advocacy. It solves the net benefit. The fiat outcome of the perm isn't known in advance. Perm looks like the CFTC agreeing to the legal advice. If the counterplan can result in the app and solves the net benefit, the perm solves. They have no genuine key app. Perms only need to be textually or functionally legitimate because counterplans need to be both. That's best. No greatness in class. Text only justifies word picks. A shift that are made from questions desired by energy semantics is unpredictable. And uneducational function only justifies or only means picks. That's seal the app and create shallow post-plan debates. It doesn't sever one. The purpose certain that Fed happens no matter what. And immediate. The process initiated immediately. Plus don't have to be immediate. Sure is not certain immediate. Dictionary 20 days should express potential future of energy condition. It's not intrinsic. Counterplan includes a time frame element. It's a process. You first request an opinion and then the OLC recommends a plan.
Did anyone write it down? I think it's
854 is what I have.
Yeah.
Can I ask like 3 questions? You read bone, correct? 85.
Both of them.
Okay, and okay, you read both. And then on the counterplan, did you say text or function or text and function?
Text and.
Okay. And then on the degrowth page, you read just king, but not actually liver and Turkish.
Correct.
Okay, great. just the LLC count. Good. All set. Not six. Okay. Before the entirety of the theory debate, the permutation cannot solve the substance of the counterpoint, and the conceded offense even so 1% risk of the net benefit, and the permutation not resolving the means that you vote negative requires conflict positions, but the OC commits the plan prior, guarantees that any delay prevails. Every deficit to do both risk applies linearly. This it is seen as the government pre-committing, accepting without conflict, and causing post hoc rationalization. The 200 does not get answers because we explicitly said that do both deficits do apply, and the conceded offense defense. It can only there's only a chance that it links, so there's no reason to include the plan at 1% risk means that for himself worse is sufficient because if conceded solvency and that the OC transparency will limit presidential nuclear burst, which is the only approximate scenario to the case independently. If it fiats the plan exactly when it would occur in the world of the company, that is definitely fiating sequencing and violates our intrinsic standard that will be below. Now, the competition debating proper. Functional competition alone is bliss. Plan specific is too high of a burden and encourages tiny agency cases since there's no unifying generic. Conceded our caveat on this page, which is good against new asks because the new undisclosed plans because there's no other predictable metric, which means that the justification on new plans good is irrelevant because even if it causes critical thinking, our form of critical thinking was a function competitive counterpoint. That was this one. They do not get answers to our interpretation because the caveat was explicit in the 2C plan specific. This too high of a burden encourages tiny agency apps since there's no unifying generic clean energy policy, and MBI are too broad and unlimiting, which grants 2AC a monopoly on the literature, including things like the broad small amounts of decarbonization, and new apps at the NDT become untenable apps and process generics due to shoddy link uniqueness and small apps, especially in a world where Trump raises hell on the economy. But process counterpoints and enforcement picks force teams to have mechanism-based advantages and read big abstract deficits serving as a functional limit on the topic. Remember the 2C on the other permutation. The question is not what to do about climate change and energy, but how we get there, because everyone obviously thinks that we have to take an environmental action, but it's the best mechanism to get there. All of these were offensive justifications that were embedded on the other part of the flow that they should have preempted if they're going for a model of competition, and we justified a model of competition on other permutation. This link turns germaneness. Limits are the larger internal link. In the case specificity, error negative. The neg is always reactionary, especially against new plans, and 2A's lie, break new, and race in the margins, especially at the NDT where every big team will always break a new F and run to the margins, making their interpretation at this tournament completely untenable. They've conceded that the topic is app bias on topicality. Dozens of sectors like data centers, aviation, shipping, ag, possible mechanism, and there's a lack of link uniqueness, especially because they're tiny and no viable politics. On the T page, they can see that there are multiple mechanisms, and then their interpretation via cap and trade or carbon tax that could create an offense against counterplans like this one. They just have to do all of these again. We're in the block and just not answered when they're going for competition alone. There's other independent words. Their interpretation justifies functional severance, where perms retain the plan text but add or scramble words like not to create unpredictable changes, which prevents testing. Second, scramble permutations. They can jumble up the words, and then letters to permute add-ons and fiat away net benefits. The most extreme versions involve changing the fonts and languages, which makes being neg impossible. Even every time they're like, not us in this debate. It's irrelevant because it's about a model of competition. Third, this plan soft issue text competition of rewards obtuse and vague plan writing. Teams will jam the plan with words like funding only if, etc. to solve core themes like innovation and politics. That independently makes the case a moving target, destroys rigorous testing, and then discourages research over the exact mandates of the plan. They've also conceded on conditionality that they speak first and last, which is also an independent advantage of another reason that is terminal defense, and they get to pick the case. Now, reject the permutation. The 2EC did not have a formal text. This might be silly, but the text is the basis for how we get to read DAs to permutations that they make, and it's possible to make deficits or severance arguments if they do not include one. Just it's obvious is irrelevant because not everything in debate is obvious, and it's all subjective and up to interpretation. So the text is necessary. They could shift out how they explain the perm in the 1AR after they heard the 2NC answers, because the 2EC articulation of this was wholly separate from what the 1AR said, which is unfair and kills clash, and the 1AR's explanation of this permutation was new, so you should strike it. No new answers. The argument was explicitly flagged as a reason to reject the permutation. 2 in our decisions, their premise off of 1AR mishaps. We might have not gone for we might have gone for substance absent the 1AR dropping the justification for including a perm text. Now, the delay perm is intrinsic, which is a voting issue for neg ground. The perm mandates the time frame distinction between the plan and the counterplan, a function that is mandated by neither advocacy. Even the plan can be delayed
delay, the perm adds a new sequencing fiated by neither. Winning their definition is not sufficient. They must prove the normal means of the permutation is sequencing. Other fiating is so intrinsic. Don't let them permute out of normal means. It lets vague plans with resolutional wording permute other untopical asks. Adding the word CEP to the plain text gives them a full range to add anything related to clean energy in the 2AC, and it kills ground. There's no distinction between their perm and the permutation that fiats the plan horse traded by the Farm Bill, or be to be politics, or perm fiat the plan through a different agency to be the trade-off DA. They can alter the normal means of the perm to fiat any action they never want, which is fundamentally the full range of intrinsic permutations. It also severs, which is a voting issue. The plan must be immediate. 1. Limits. Delay justifies science fiction apps that occur thousands of years down the line in utopian realities. If it is not a counterplan, it is an app which there's zero literature for negation because cases become so niche and unpredictable, which outweighs. They have no defense of this becoming an app, which the 2A does not get to do so. 2A's already have a monopoly on the literature because MBI and CAP and decarbonization are meaningless, and there's no agent-based limitation on the resolution, which massively constrains generic prep. Second is ground. Every net benefit is time sensitive. They can fiat the plan after the bill happens, or a rider bill passes. Even deals like oil, LNG, rates, or any econ rely on the current political moment. That's magnified since they let the 2AC post hoc re-clarify the app's timeframe via permutation, so it's impossible to pair when it applies. The advances. Counterplans are competition zero since they always fiat the plan after even thousands of years in the future. Third, education. Again, conceded. Delay destroys timely education. Debate isn't a unique enclave of academia. We're forced to keep up with current events. We can do it later. Gets rid of every form of politics and economic or immediate reality, which makes the apps run from the DAs. Independently, it turns process bad. The neg would be forced into word picks because process strategies turn nothing else. Process counterplans are no longer competitive. They've also conceded onto the counterplan that this counterplan itself is good for force of law reasons, and it is a pick out of enforcement. And this should be a TKO because delayed perms would get rid of counterplans like this one, making all neg ground impossible. Also drop that neg ground is already hard. Everyone agrees that competition issue, which I impacted out above. Everything on do the counterplan is offense, which the 1 year did not preempt, so the 2 year does not get to do so. Lastly, bad counterplans. 1. Theory checks. Judges adapt since they coach teams who have to be affirmative too, which is why word picks are not the main. Second is this counterplan is good, which was on to do counterplan. Third, this plan text writing checks, even if they don't have a defense, the CP should or adopt. They should or they should remove them from the plan.
Sorry, I'm gonna record this. Just whatever.
It's recorded.
Oh. Good. All three? Sweet. Oh, I'll see, obviously. Okay. Just in case. Perm do the counterplan and then the plan itself is not benefit because the fiat outcome of the plan looks like the CFTC following the recommendation of the OLC. We extended this perm because the 2NC made 2 key mistakes, and you should scratch the answer for the 2NR. 1. The 2NR did not contain, or the 2NC did not contain a warrant for why the perm was intrinsic. They asserted it at a time, but the counterplan includes that too, which was explained in the 1AR. More importantly, if the 2NC did not include a deficit to the perm, all they had to do was say cross-apply the answers from to both, and they didn't, so this is truly just a competition debate because the cross-application is new. I will answer it anyway in a moment, but there are a couple framing issues for competition first. Ask yourself, is the world you want to live in one where your NDT prep is Google searches like random legal word within 5 decarbonization, within 100 nuclear war? This is a model that Michigan has showed up with. If you think 1 NCs with 7 process counterplans and 0 disadvantages is the way to learn about the topic, then you are out of your mind. Having debates about with breadth that do not rely on hypergeneric garbage is far more valuable. We learn to actually engage each other instead of going for pre-written certainty deficits and perm blocks. If you think that that is a better model of debate, you should vote affirmative even despite the ticky-tacky, because it is a framing issue for how you understand the impacts. And if it's a desirable model of debate, these are things that they complain about on topicality. Remember when the 2NC said that a lack of limits of ground forces reliance on hypergeneric process garbage? Yes, the 2NC said these things, and now they took them back in the 2NR. What about when they said that net ground outweighs because depth should outweigh breadth? Their model of debate is one that sacrifices all those things and forces both teams to rely on hypergeneric garbage that sacrifices breadth, that sacrifices depth, because all we do is learn about a 1,000 useless counterplans. The model of competition is exactly what they accused us of creating on topicality, and we all agreed it was a disaster then. Our interpretation is that perms need to be textually or functionally competitive, so counterplans have to be both. That is the best for fairness and clash, and to preserve a model of debate that is valuable for anybody participating in it. Function-only competition justifies normal means picks, which steal the affirmative with unpredictable literature about legal minutia that do not engage in the topic and are not about the resolution, so the affirmative can never prepare it in advance. Excuse the literature because there are not arguments about these mechanisms in the plan, so we all rely on evidence that's close enough, but not actually about the debates we're having. It wrecks both teams. First is the affirmative. It means we never get deep in the literature about the affirmative because we never have to contest its desirability, just legal minutia over how it should be done. The 2NR, the 2NC and 2NR said that those debates are valuable, but there is a limit to how valuable that is. A dissent also tests how the app should be done, like the CFTC trade-off dissent. We do not need to rely on hypergeneric process counterplans to do so. It also destroys the negative clash in fairness. There's no incentive to go to topic dissent if all you need to do is almost fiat the affirmative, but have one card that says it's just a little bit different. It means that neither side gets to actually learn about the topic or have clashful debates where we actually get to learn all these things are what matters in the real world, and the reason we debate it is the skills that we get from it, and not simply the legal minutia over learning about one particular counterplan mechanism. Now, the argument about good versus new plans was answered on advantage counterplans. It is an arbitrary interpretation, but critical thinking outweighs because the 2NC contain no warrant why new plans uniquely justify any of their competition arguments, which means that critical thinking should outweigh because it is the actual value that we get from debate. The plan specifying argument was irrelevant. The 2A's now the one framing issue from the negative was that the resolution is bad and the 2A's have a monopoly on literature. All of their warrants cut both ways. The link uniqueness is incredible in a world of Trump because he is certainly not doing any green policy now, and the Trumper also destroys things like climate advantages or trade harmonization advantages, which means that their warrants apply to both sides. A topic on MBI they do not get to cross-apply because of whatever extended functional limit, which means that the negative is always in the game because they find a way to be responsive. Now the question about the argument about cross-applying the argument at the top about cross-applying the deficits to the perm are wrong. One, the 2NR unpacked none of them, which means you should not fill in the blanks for them, and they did not explicitly do so. In the 2NC, there was no impact to them because they conceded our concession at the top of the 1A arguments. Even if the perm is not solved, you should feel comfortable zeroing the net benefit and voting F on presumption because they did not extend impact to the 2NR. So just solvency, so you can just vote on their zero net benefit to the counterplan, and there is no there's no impact to that benefit. 3, the accountability evidence does not quantify the deficit. It says some transparency is good, but doesn't say that no transparent doesn't solve or makes it harder to implement via counterplan. It solves 100% of the net benefit because it still does the counterplan before the plan, which results in the same LLC constraints for post-hoc dissent making the same argument, but can't apply either because the perm would mean that any LLC advisor would be held accountable and implement the plan accordingly before the CFTC does so. Now, the arguments about the scramble perms, we do not justify those because our chart does not include things like that. It just says that perms need to be textually or functionally competitive. It does not justify scramble because that would direct the counterplans. The arguments about textual competition causing bad plans there is wrong because if the app were to add random words to the plain text, it would lose to a pick out of that, so there's no incentive to do that. The argument about rejecting the perm because there was new text is irrelevant. They should have asked in cross-sections if it matters so much, and the 1 year explained that it is not relevant because it was pretty clear. The argument about rating dissents to perms is relevant because if it matters so much, they would have simply asked. It was also answered at the top of the 1AR, not a conceded argument. Now, the perm is not intrinsic. The counterplan counterplan includes time commitment, I do not need to win any of the competition or models of debate element of this. If I simply win that the perm is not intrinsic and does not sever, it isn't intrinsic. The counterplan includes an element of time. I do not think the 2-1R answer this. The counterplan first has the executive request an opinion and then has the OLC deliver it. There is no universe where those two things can happen at the same time because you gotta answer a question before the question has been asked or at the same time. None of their evidence assumes a world where the counterplan is simultaneous action, which means the perm cannot be intrinsic because the counterplan also includes delay. We are just extending that delay and using more of it for the affirmative. It is also not severance. The perm is certain because the plan happens no matter what, and is immediate because the process of the counterplan is adopted immediately. The 2-1R did not extend a definition of the word should. Should is not immediate or certain. It's a dictionary, which is the plain meaning, which is what you should use now. The stuff at the bottom, no limits argument, because abnormal hundreds of years do not have advantages and they can't be dissaid. Plus, it loses to the counterplan to do now with the delay deficit. The education argument, as straightened above, and the argument that they get that will read more process counterplans is absurd because our model solves it, and the argument that this particular counterplan is bogus because our model is worse than their model is worse than ours. Sorry.
We're all in. Okay. How was Austin? Great. Great debate, everybody. The decision is a 2-1 for the negative from Michigan. I assume the main point where I diverge is that I concluded that the permutation was not intrinsic. A large portion of this for me was that I concluded that the introduction of the should debate in the Guarantor resulted in the act gaining a lot of leeway on what constitutes when the act can occur. The neg's main pushback on this I thought was okay, but was not sufficient to overcome just the fact that there is a T part in the YR and the app is established for intrinsicness, which ultimately is a component of topicality, is what can the app be beholden to do. The app can be beholden to do an implementation of the 1AC whensoever they please. The only reason why this should not be a thing is theoretical reasons for why these kinds of debates are bad. The neg couches this primarily in an assumption that that is already inherently intrinsic, but the app, by creating predictable interpretation of what a should definition is, that would not necessarily be an unpredictable model, and that cuts back into some of what the neg is. Another large component of this is that I feel the debate was largely late-breaking, which is obvious with any permutation debate, but that ultimately benefits the app. Usually it does here. I think that cross applications from things like T, where just the kinds of debate that the neg has argued are good earlier in the debate, are those that the neg's model in fact does not benefit, and the app is very justified in referencing those things, and that is very justifiable for the 2AR and the 1AR to contain those arguments. The other component I thought that was major is that I thought the permutation being not intrinsic is sufficient to prevent it from linking to the permutation to go to offense. the permutation do both offense, because the aft does not contain a permutation text, and because the aft's explanation of the permutation is very vague, I felt very closely to convinced by NEG, very closely, that is sufficient to vote NEG on a link, exclusively because there is, the aft is no offense, and there is any infinitesimally small risk that the time frame in which this thing, permutation, occurs would be so close to the OLC and to be perceived as basically at the same time, and that's triggerable. The only reason I don't conclude that is just largely the aft's earlier reasons for why the should debate means they would apply at literally any point in the aft, explaining pretty consistently that it would be after, which implies that it probably can't be at the same point. Really the fact that it is so infinitesimally small is what grinds it down to zero in my mind in that context. Some little extraneous things, I thought that a lot of the NEG's offense for the differences in models of debate was not super useful. The best is NEG flags, which is necessary for Clash, and that was ported from Condo, and I thought the app should have responded to that in the 1 hour, just the obvious cross applications of Condo would have been relevant for the permutation debate. NEG flex is whatever. The Twitter makes a good argument that it cuts back a lot of the checks where the NEG check back equally against the aft and restrict aft advantages with Trumpiness being prevalent, etc. It's probably harder to be NEG given Trumpiness and recent tariffs, etc. So I find that reasonable. The other arguments are like the aft will just add a bunch of words to the plan text and that firms out like the politics DA and whatever. But the aft is like community norms check that. Nobody really does that. This argument is ridiculous. Our model still has to be textually competitive, so there's no words in the politics DA that you are permuting because it's not technical. That's all.
I would neg. I think the perm is probably illegitimate, and even if it is legit, any risk it doesn't solve to be the counterplanchal load is preferable. I want to start with the second part. This is most of my ballot, and I think that this debate is distinct from perm to the counterplan, or most debates like this, because most debates like this are perm to the counterplan, which, if legitimate, is always a sufficient condition for the affirmative. This perm, on the other hand, is obviously distinct, and I do think the 2NR is correct that the perm parts also apply to this perm. The 2NR says the counterplan also includes delay. Definitely new, don't have this in the 1AR, plus their text is pretty good for them. It doesn't say the executive requests an opinion and then the OLC does the plan. They just both happen, the sentences are next to each other. The 2AR says that the application of these perm cards is new. I'm not sure if the 2NC explicitly said do both cards apply, but like the 2AC just spewed perms. This perm doesn't even have a text. And so I'm really willing to give the next some leeway on this. Plus, I think it's really predictable and an intuitive cross-application. But what I do know I have the 2NC and 2NR saying is use strict offense defense, which is like the third argument in the 2NC. And I think that means any risk, including the president, Congress, or whoever could delegitimize the body nature of the OLC's advice, means I just vote nay. I wish the 2NR would unpack these perm do both cards and apply it to this perm more, or even just pick one of them. But when there's no solvency deficit in the 1AR and the 2NR, the threshold is just so small, and I don't know how. Just any risk means I vote nay. Competition, this is a lot closer. I spent less time thinking about it because of the aforementioned decision. I'm very much with the top of the 2AR about how I want the topic of research to look like, but I think the neg is winning that textual competition would be worse. Like the framing stuff at the top of 2AR, new apps, Trump rights, uniqueness, app flies, plus them winning that this counterplan is educational, I think all sets up a big framing argument for why the counterplans justified by functional competition are necessary on this topic. I think the app has some smart offensive justifications for this perm, but I don't think you have a lot of very good defense to their arguments for why your model of competition would be worse. Yeah, I'll have like a question. We'll leave it at that.
I started on some of this, also decided I guess a little bit differently. I'm a negative. I think that the offense-defense paradigm thing is also important for me, and I think that there is a conceded net benefit to transparency, so I think that the 2AR is just wrong on this question of there not being a terminal impact, because the 2NC specifically, or the 2NR specifically says that it resolves first strike, and it wasn't answered in the 1AR, even though I do agree that you probably could have done a bit more impact explanation to make it a little bit more specific. So then the question becomes whether I think that the permutation alone or the permutation including the plan can solve better. But in order to resolve that question, I go to the legitimacy, just like theoretical legitimacy of it. I actually ended up deciding negative on the textual and functionally competitive argument versus the affirmative, just one or the other. The warrant for the negative is that textual competition is key to be able to develop deficits to permutations, and that it ensures a lack of shifty explanations from the affirmative in differences between the 2AC, 1AR, and the 2AR, because when there isn't a text for the permutation, there is no stasis point and ability for them to check back. Meanwhile, the affirmative argues in the 1AR that textual competition is a key and that you can have one or the other textual or functional competition, because the counterplans must be both. I think that there's a disconnect between that affirmative answer and the negatives argument, because the negative isn't going for a specific, like, you are not textually competitive violation. It's like, it seems more to me that it's like textual competition is key, but it's because of these stasis point arguments. So I think that even though all the reasons for why textual competition is good and should be implied, there isn't a good answer to the negative offense about the text being key to clash, providing deficits, and getting the negative ground off the ground in these permutation debates. They also are just conceded, so I kind of just consider them kind of highly. The only warrant, as I explained above, about it being counterplans can be one or the other, is also distinct from the 2AR explanation for why textual competition is bad. I just found the 2AR explanation entirely disconnected from the 1AR. There was no justification for why textual competition is bad, how it causes breadth over depth, how researching a single word is mumbo jumbo, it lacks limits. And so I just thought it was a bit too new, given that the 1AR had ample opportunity to at least say that textual competition is bad for these reasons vaguely. I just felt like they were too new for me to vote on in comparison to consistent negative explanations from things that were present in the 2NC. The last factor that I considered this was also, and that also did play into my decision, is that I think that the negative is ahead on the error negative question. They had several warrants. There was the new plan warrant, there's the critical thinking answer. The critical thinking question is that we should be allowed to have new plans that aren't disclosed in response to condo. I don't get the further sentence of why that means that the functional limits actual competition debate should flow affirmative. I think maybe it undercuts the argument a little bit, but there's not an answer to Stratsky, vague plan writing, and structural advantages to the affirmative that the 2NR extended. I think that all of those warrants that I just said are distinct from the new plan thing, and the reasons why I should just air an egg on this question and try to make the topic tenable for negatives. I think you're right about the Donald Trump thing, cutting both directions, so that's something that I think just is it didn't play into my decision. The intrinsicness question for me, so because I decide this way on the theoretical foundation of the permutation, it means that the intrinsicness question is actually not as important to my decision. I think that it needs to be text, you needed to provide a text, and that was the framing that was given in the 2NR, is that this is a prior question before I go into the intrinsicness debate. But some comments on it. I think that the negative is definitely ahead, I think the negative is ahead on the idea that intrinsic permutations are bad and for why allowing time frame permutations are bad, but I am persuaded by the app's argument that sequencing is normal means for the counterclaim. That's actually, I think that you are winning that argument because it's logically inconsistent to ask for advice and get a responsive opinion simultaneously. I read the counterclaim text, it doesn't say the sequencing, but your evidence is enough that I think that the description of it as normal means, which is how you phrased it, is fair from the affirmative. But what I'm actually unsettled about is whether or not intrinsicness and severance in this question about the should debate and just time frame permutations separate from intrinsic permutations are necessarily implicated. So even if I think that it's not an intrinsic permutation because it's doing something that is a part of the counterplan, I think that the negative is ahead, that the affirmative should not get time frame permutations because those are independently bad for all of the reasons about science fiction and being able to do things so far into the future. And so those two things kind of separate for me. I think that there's more reasons for why should in the interpretation of the negative is better than allowing time frame permutations that are separate from the app's defense of intrinsicness. So I think maybe if there was there's more of that in the 2AR, because I think you get to the should step at the bottom, you extend the definition, and you say it's not inevitable. I just think they have more reasons why the definition is good for debate, which is why I end up deciding to look at it too. So for all those reasons, I end up rejecting the permutation, which means that the offense defense thing is it. I think the permutation solves this. Or the counterplan alone solves this. Not complicated and stuff.
We'll keep this quick and I might like send out an email because it's late, but
Sure.
just a question for you, I guess, though, like, offense, defense aside, because I just should have, like, handled that for the 1 hour, the, like, counter plan is not, has no time frame to it. I understand that, like, the text does not say, like, first, we should request an opinion, then we should, but I feel like some of the 2AR, which I actually thought was in the 1 hour, but I guess maybe not, was about just, like, there's no, like, real-world understanding of this counter plan, where these things happen simultaneously, and, like, none of their ebb is about that either. Like, that's simply not how, like, the world works. You can't, like, the OLC doesn't, like, give opinions the same instant that they're asked to do so. Like, that just isn't how things happen. Like, is that persuasive to you? You're just like, well, the counter plan doesn't have the word then, so, GG.
It is persuasive to me. I think that with an incontestable risk of a solvency deficit combined with it, then, you know, we got a game, but any risk. But the thing is, I also think that their perm answers to both answers cross-applying to this perm are not just about the nature of timing, right? It's also about the actor. So there are arguments about why the perm would delegitimize the credibility of the OLC is including another actor doing the plan, which would look like the advice of the OLC is left binding. As I'm imagining this perm, we don't have text, it's OLC request and then plan.
Yeah.
The counterplan is OLC request and then only OLC action. So then including Congress or the president or whatever the actor of the plan is would then make it look like the OLC's advice is not what spurred
Okay,
the counterplan.
do you think explanation, maybe even if it's new-ish, but just being like, it would look like the CFTC like following on, right? Like if the OLC is like, here's how the law works, here is what you are legally required to do because we're the OLC and that's like our job. And then the CFTC is like, got it, like now I'm gonna do it. Like I feel like that's kind of how the perm like works in my mind. Is like OLC suggests they're like, this is how the law works, and then the CFTC is like, yes, Captain, like, and then they go do it. Like, does that not make sense to you? Like, how does that delegitimize the OLC?
Well,
Which I understand, like, not all these words were in the 2AR.
Yeah.
But, like, were the
Yeah, for the future.
had those words been in the 2AR? Are you there with me?
1AR for sure. Well, so the thing is, when the 1AR only goes for this perm is conceding these cards on perm to both, right? Which logically applies to this perm. So this would have to be a much bigger press in the 1AR answering these cards. Because I think these cards obviously logically apply to any perm that includes an actor outside the OLC.
To resolve this, I think you could, so there's two things, which is, so one, as a quick aside, I agree with the neg, or the neg characterization and the neg judge characterization that the 2AR does not have a full explanation of this, of like the sequencing and how it occurs, but I think you can resolve that in two ways. One is literally just like fixing the perm text, so it has like the OLC and then the plan after it, like literally just like the OLC text and then the plan text.
Yeah.
It's like it clearly comes after. It flips a switch. People's
Well,
minds.
I mean, it's
They
a
realize
counterplan, right? Like, they would never write a counterplan that has them follow an opinion.
Yeah,
and
and
then
it's like,
the second
here's the
sentence
counterplan
being
text, here's the plan
request.
text. It just follows that line. The 2AR can then use simple allegories. The counterplan that says the United States should nuke Russia, the United States should build nukes, would obviously imply that we build nukes after nuking Russia and build up our nukes. A counterplan that's like the U.S. should build nukes, then right after the U.S. should nuke Russia would imply that we launch our nukes at Russia. And there's obviously like leeway in that, like not every counterplan would be explained that way, and then it's like whatever. But it's a simple way to explain that, and I think it explains that. But regardless, I think that is what is more helpful in context of those like explanation is. But also like the perm text, like literally, like well, the sequencing perm is literally just the first counterplan, the text of counterplan, and then that's like that. Also slight aside for the neg. A like medium reason of why I ended up voting AF is the AF got like a ridiculous amount of leeway for me off of the claim of just like the neg is doing bad faith engagement with the 1AC and they're voting for this counterplan. This like just proves their model debate like devolves to like nothingness and garbage. If the 1AC was like more reasonable and not like 7 not carbon related, I mean there's like 2 carbon related things, whatever. But if was like reasonable, and then like maybe some actual case engagement. Not like, I don't, you know, it's like it's just you see that, and it's like that's bad faith engagement. The AF can point at this and be like, this is what happened. Like, please do not do this. It's like absent that, it's like I agree. I think you're opening many parts of the medium to larger big picture of the film. But it's like that just like pushes it over the edge.
Last question, Evan, for you. I'm a little confused as to the like distinction between the like time frame and intrinsicness thing. Like presumably, if the perm, in a world where the perm isn't intrinsic, like because the counterplan itself had an element of time, so the perm did not add an element of time. Why does our model justify the bad, like should and time frame stuff? Like it's almost like a T debate where it's like we meet it because the perm like did not add time frame because the counterplan had it, and so there's no like limits exposure. It's like the analogy of toxicality, right? Like they're like your counterinterpret's bad, and it's like right, but like we went for we meet it in the sense, which like the perm never added time. So reasons why a model that adds time would be bad is like kind of irrelevant, which is why I got there with so little time. But I don't know if that makes sense.
It kind of makes sense, and I think like it's something that I'm like maybe a little puzzled by, and that's also why I didn't feel like that's not the crux of my decision for why I didn't evaluate your permutation. So it's more kind of like me thinking through it, but there's a lot of uncertainty with this, so I can understand your frustration. The reason is because I think that it is not obvious to me that it's the same debate because of models. And so one of the things that was said in the 2NR is like, even if they win, it's like, this isn't us in this debate, it's that the model of allowing time frame permutations in general spills over. And that was like one line that I thought was like at least enough to think, okay, so even if this specific permutation on this counterplan is like contextually, specifically, maybe not as bad, it's theoretically illegitimate for debate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's room to sort of cross-apply that and be like, in that case, the fact that you've asserted that this particular counterplan is valuable for debate is equally irrelevant? Like, I feel like both teams are kind of playing the like
irrelevant or
irrelevant. Like both teams are kind of playing the game where it's like only like
No, I think
abuse in
that's
this debate versus like it's about models, and we're both like using it when it's convenient.
Yeah, and this counterplan being good, yeah, that wasn't part of my
Yeah.
decision.
Okay. Thanks.
I want to, I guess I have a question. Okay. The first one for you, Owen. I understand the intrinsic thing. Okay, first, why didn't you conclude the permutation severed?
What is the permutation severed?
We read a definition that should means immediate, and it would sever immediacy, because it would come after the counterplan.
The counterplan does not sever immediacy.
No, it would sever the plane's immediacy.
The AF does not sever immediacy.
Why?
The 1AR has one that should is better. Their interpretation should is better.
So you concluded, so like you evaluated all like it allows like science fiction AFs, DA, we don't get DA links and concluded AF on that.
I did not conclude that their model allows for those things to occur because community norms and their model, their model doesn't allow it. You haven't explained why. I don't understand the connection between the AF can be whatever and the AF actually being we will take place in 700, no climate change AF, whatever, do that. Like they've never solved climate change. Nobody's read an AF that solves in 2700. These things.
Why
like,
not read an
don't-
app that just like passes after whatever the politics bill of the day is?
Yeah, like we said carbon tax happened in 2025 to avoid elections.
That is the AF has made the argument, and you've also made the argument that the way normal means and like intrinsicness for like competition occurs is that you can understand normal means for DA links, etc. Like just generally how like counterplans versus AFs go when you're going against a counterplan for competition. Normal means is generally how you do it for DA links. This is a fine for competition. The definitions, etc., are reasonable. The reason why like these AFs do not just suddenly populate massively is again A, community norms, and B, they're answered by generics the same way.
I have two. First, it's just like, well, like it's competition as a T debate. It's like we said, it's what they justify. Community norms is external to that, given all of those apps would be like quote topical under that model. Why is that not true?
I don't think that those apps would be topical under that model because they're
that makes
limited by
sense.
other things.
Okay, and then what did you think the 1AR said for that? To answer like more justification of should, like the links plus limits.
Oh, did a definition, and I think some of the offense was on T. I think it was weak.
Okay, that makes
and I
sense.
think
Okay.
2AR's contextualization of those cross applications was in them. Again, I think that the 1NC and just not really engaging gap helps with like pushing those things.
Okay, my other question was about that. So like, if we have you later in the tournament and like somebody like, you know, breaks in or reads an app that like links to less things and like carbon tax, and we like impact turn and have like a T thing, but we also include process. And like the plan was to go for substance, but like given the 1AR only extended the delay plan, I went for the counterplan. Like if that were like I shouldn't go for the counterplan given the 1NC was a lot of process.
I am not very good for process.
Okay, that makes sense. And like that's just like there's not a condition that you'll be lenient. Like
I mean, so so it's like it's hard for me to adjudicate and understand what is a new and effective non-option app. I'm not sure how to tell you to resolve that question, honestly. But when answering new apps in front of me, it's like if the NC has a DA and you're terrified of it being like straight turn, I'm probably you can probably win other judges on the process CPU or whatever. And I'm like, it's not. I think this debate was very close on a technical level, and so it's like,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then all three on like, I thought about going for DDEV. Like I thought we had like a whole bunch of internal link terms like growth equal AI, not regulated, like growth causes disease, etc.
Yeah, that DDEV was fine.
Okay, you thought that one was better. I also thought T was maybe a little viable, but I'm more like way more neg biased on the T thing. Was there a preferred 2 and R that was not this one, even though it got it done?
I thought this was the right decision.
This is the right decision. DDEV second. I've judged 1 tournament on this year, so I'm not really sure what's going on with T.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Between T and DDEV, where were you?
T.
Okay.
I thought your cards on T were surprisingly okay, and MSU's were also surprisingly okay. But in a debate where both are like pretty good, it's like they have a bigger limit to push, and it's like, yeah, that's just like it just like pushes out or most likely I haven't seen them. So
Okay, that makes sense. I'll probably send an email, but thank you.
Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.